Chapter 405. I'm Jian, as in simple so-and-so. Su-Lu stood in the shadows at the side of the stage, vigilantly watching his surroundings while listening to the 7 groups of reports from his headphones. His eyes were fixed on the graceful and charming girl on the stage, and his mood was gently swaying along with the lyrics that came out of her red lips. The simple so-and-so referred to Jian, or Jian Shui. The simple lyrics were written by her personally. Although it seemed a little long and complicated, everyone knew that those lyrics were talking about her life, the bizarre 19 years of life of a national idol. Especially for Su-Lu, whether it was the assassination in Linhai or the terrorist attack on the concert in Huangshan 4 states, even if he was not directly involved, he was deeply involved in these things, so he felt it more deeply. Jian Shui sang this song on the stage for the first time. Su-Lu looked at her quietly, thinking about the years that had passed. Only then did he realize that a girl's voice could be so low and fluctuating, and in the end, there was a trace of honesty and stubbornness. Thinking silently, the music gradually faded, the lights dimmed, and several military singers went on stage to perform. After the last break, Su-Lu plugged in his headphones, hurriedly walked backstage to the electric downstairs, and held Jian Shui's hand as they walked to the dressing room. The backstage of the concert was like a war. Half a minute later, Jian Shui came out of the changing room. Su-Lu, the only male in the room, couldn't help but stiffen slightly. His mouth was half open, and he was almost unable to speak because of that beautiful light. The last 3 songs of the concert were dynamic dance songs. Jian Shui was wearing a very cool costume, unprecedentedly cool. The girl's purple hair was combed as smooth as a ray of light, and then tied up with a thin red ribbon, very eye-catching. The most important thing was that she was only wearing a very tight strapless dress with a white broadband belt around her waist. Her beautiful shoulders were exposed, and the close-fitting cut of the dress highlighted the girl's curves. And because of the low-cut design, one could even see the charming shadow between the 2 soft lumps of flesh. Jian Shui was also very not used to this costume. With a trace of shyness, she covered her chest with her right hand, stuck out her tongue and said, "It's the first time I've dressed like this." With this small movement, the girl's playful and youthful sexiness gushed out of her body. Su-Lu was a little embarrassed and lowered his head, only to find that the soft and tight red skirt was surprisingly short, revealing her slender legs. Su-Lu was silent, thinking that if she went on stage and danced like this, wouldn't the soldiers see everything? Jian Shui had always appeared in public with a healthy, fresh, and cute image. Now that Su-Lu knew her family background, he naturally knew that this national girl didn't need to show her beautiful body, and probably no one would dare ask her to do so. It's hard to imagine what those soldiers will do when they return to camp tonight. Maybe it was because of the contrast between the noisy backstage and the quiet here, or maybe it was because the girl in front of him was charming and sexy enough to turn everyone upside down, which made Su-Lu a little awkward. He actually said what was in his mind. He just didn't say that if the girl went on stage like this and exposed her body freely, it would definitely make countless people fantasize. This costume was not prepared by the performance team in advance, but by Jian Shui after they went to the hospital and the cemetery that day. The girl bravely put down her right hand that was covering her body. Her cheeks were a little hot, and she opened her big eyes and said to Su-Lu, "For the Federation, they stayed on this faraway planet for 2 years. You know, some of them are younger than me, maybe they haven't been in love before, they will die." Jian Shui took a deep breath, and her short red skirt fluttered gently. She narrowed her eyes and said cutely, "If that's the case, isn't it good to make them happy?" This beautiful and moving national girl was undoubtedly the most lustful object in the Federation. Wearing the poster of the warship's military officer uniform, who knew how many otakus and uncles would accompany her in the middle of the night when they were lonely. Not to mention, she was dressed so charmingly today, just like a little fairy, In fact, Su was also one of these people, so right now his face was a little hot. Su said to make them fantasize, and Jian Shui'er said with her big eyes, for the Federation, they stayed on this planet for 2 years, maybe they will die. These young people probably haven't even been in love before, so what's there to be afraid of? I don't even care if they lick me. Su blushed, thinking that she seemed to have done it before. In the strong rhythm of the dance music, accompanied by many dance groups, Jian Shui'er appeared in the center of the stage in an unprecedentedly cool outfit. She held the standing microphone tightly with both hands, and her eyes were as clear as autumn water. She looked at the night sky and sang, and then she began to gently twist her body to the rhythm. Her movements were very smooth and seductive, but it had the unique innocence of a young girl. Regardless of whether it was her moving eyebrows or the slight movement of her waist, she did not deliberately reveal a trace of seductive gaze or body language. However, the young girl's peerlessly beautiful and inviolable face, coupled with this skin-tight short skirt that could kill eyeballs, the tens of thousands of Federation soldiers on the stage were first stunned, and then they were silent, and then a loud echo suddenly broke out. In the previous concert, most of the applause and cheers were heard, but now it turned into excited whistles. Su nervously watched her on the stage. That red miniskirt was made of extremely thin material, and it was extremely tight-fitting, making the girl's tight and enchanting legs look extremely seductive. The designer was not satisfied, and actually made a slit on both sides of the miniskirt. As the girl gently twisted, the dazzling spring scenery inside the miniskirt was faintly discernible. The whistles under the stage became crazier and crazier. The members of Group 7, who were responsible for the security work, were dumbfounded. The people of the performance team and the broadcasting team looked at the national girl on the stage who they had never known before and were completely shocked. Su Li's mouth was dry. He really wanted to take off his black formal suit, rush to the stage, and tie it around her waist. However, what she said before had touched him. Just listening to the crazy reaction of the soldiers under the stage, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Was this to rally the soldiers' hearts or to shake the soldiers' hearts? The youthful and playful little sex appeal on the stage was played to the extreme in the last song. When Jian Shui'er, who changed into a dark Federation female officer uniform, appeared on the stage again, the little sex appeal had completely become a divine artifact that catalyzed male hormones. Everyone in the Federation saw her appear on the screen in this battleship commander uniform when she was 14 years old. This represented the collective memory of a generation. Today, the short skirt of the captain's military uniform was cut to its shortest length, and the top 2 buttons were undone. Only a military officer's scarf was casually draped over her fair skin. Her slightly messy purple hair was stuck to her moving cheeks because of the fragrant perspiration that seeped out from her perspiration. Still inexperienced, still shy, Jian Shui'er forced herself to calmly release all the charm of a female captain. It turned out that this was the final climax of the concert. Su stared at this scene in a daze. He didn't notice that the thousands of fireworks behind the concert were once again lit up, and the pillars of light that created the crazy atmosphere began to sweep again. Countless fireworks exploded on the strategic boundary line between the north and south of Planet 5460. The electric control network on the front line of the Federation had been monitoring the missile base of the Empire, but the first to launch an attack in the dark was not the missile force of the Empire, but the 17 Empire armored regiments with the momentum of tigers and wolves. Armored vehicles and self-propelled heavy cannons poured ammunition without any regard for the cost. The dense and terrifying roar was absolutely not one after another, because there was absolutely no moment of interruption in the middle. The front line, which had been quiet for a long time, was like a hurricane. Once it landed, it began to show its terrifying power. On the boundary line between the north and south that stretched for 3,000 kilometers, countless clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. Before they could disperse, they were shattered by the second wave of attacks. The loud explosions and blinding flashes were like fireworks in a concert, illuminating the entire sky. The high-speed Empire armored regiments and the even faster mecha squads shot out a soul-devouring and life-reaping rain of bullets from their cannons, madly sweeping the Federation's defense line. It was just that the light beams couldn't kill people, but the rain of bullets from the Imperial Expeditionary Force continued to destroy the Federation's defense line, reaping the lives of the Federation's soldiers. At the end of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, Jian Shuai held a concert on Planet 5460 called Victory. The Imperial Expeditionary Force suddenly launched an all-out attack, charging towards the south with an indomitable momentum and terrifying firepower. It was as if they turned into 17 unstoppable sharp knives, stabbing straight towards the southern hemisphere. This planet, which hadn't had a large-scale war for a long time, finally began to tremble. The attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was like a hurricane. The moment it landed, it began to show its powerful destructive power without any hesitation. The Third War between the Federation and the Empire officially began because of a concert. The location of the Victory concert was in the Southern Hemisphere Federation's headquarters, which was still a long distance away from the location where the Imperial Expeditionary Force launched their attack. However, as soon as the concert ended, an ear-piercing air defense siren filled the sky. The soldiers, who were still immersed in the impact of Jian Shuai's uniform, suddenly had a serious expression on their faces. They woke up from their crazy emotions and quickly began to return to the camp, preparing for battle. The Federation's television station immediately cut off the broadcast signal, and Jian Shuai, who had just walked off the stage, was surrounded by 7 groups of armed personnel, beginning to prepare to evacuate. Unlike the soldiers, most of the people in this team were civilians. Hearing the ear-piercing siren, they were naturally terrified. An officer quickly arranged the evacuation matters while comforting everyone. The first wave of medium-range missiles launched by the Empire has been intercepted by the Waigwa system. The military fleet has been dispatched. Please don't panic. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lo. A major general walked over with a serious face, handed over an electronic document, and said, "This is the secret mission given to you by the Ministry of National Defense." Su Li's heart sank slightly. He knew that things had finally come. Chapter 406. Su Lu looked at the top-secret military electronic order and narrowed his eyes. All the questions he had after receiving the mission from the headquarters of Whitewater Company a few months ago were partially answered by this document. Since the Victory concert was a small part of this large-scale military operation, it made sense for him and Group 7 to be in charge of security. Therefore, he didn't ask any boring questions like whether or not he could accept the mission. Instead, he asked the Major General, "We only need to send Jian Shuai to the warship, and the mission is considered over?" The Federation's Major General couldn't be young. A Major General under 40 like Du Shaoqing was extremely rare. The Major General in front of him was around 50 years old. His expression was cold, and he wasn't very polite to Su Lu. He said in a deep voice, "What you need to do now is to execute, not ask. The headquarters will send a reinforced battalion to escort you to Sichuan Airport. You need to leave immediately." Su Lu nodded silently and looked around. Although the headquarters couldn't hear the explosions at the front line, they could faintly smell the smoke and feel the pressure of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's large-scale attack. The members of Group 7 were already prepared to depart. Jian Shuai's team was also waiting to depart. In this tense moment, everyone's movements seemed to be countless times faster than usual. After all, if they stayed here any longer, no one knew if a missile would fall on their heads in the next second. The general said in a deep voice, "Let's go. I will personally accompany you." Su Lu knew Jian Shuai's identity, so he was not surprised by the Major General's words. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the figures around him in the dark. After confirming that the military had sent an entire mechanical division to protect them, he was slightly relieved. He turned around and held Jian Shui'er's hand, and quickly walked to the black car. After getting into the car, he turned on the car's radar and main control system as fast as he could. At the same time, he put on his sunglasses and said in his mind, "Old man, watch the road for me." After getting in touch with the Federal Central Computer, Su Li's mood became calmer. He didn't see the impending crisis as terrifying. Accompanied by pungent exhaust fumes, a fleet of military vehicles using compound power roared out of the base camp in the dark night and quickly advanced toward the Zichou spaceport in the southwest direction. A light battleship of the Federation was already ready to take off there, waiting to escort Jian Shui'er and her team away from this terrifying planet that was already covered in a sea of fire and craggy stars. Su Lu controlled the steering wheel and drove the black car, leading his subordinates' motorcade. Under the protection of an entire battalion, they quickly advanced along the road. The temperature in the car had not immediately risen. Through the rear-view hologram, he looked at the girl curled up in the chair behind him. He neatly took off his black summer coat and threw it over, saying, "Wear this, don't catch a cold." Jian Shui'er, who didn't have time to change her clothes, was still wearing the extremely short and cool captain's uniform. She didn't know if it was because of the cold, or because she was frightened, or because she still hadn't shaken off the mood of the concert, but her cheeks and ears were slightly red. She took the coat that had Su Li sent and silently put it on. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack was extremely fierce. The motorcade that was preparing to leave the planet was silent. Only the car's communication system rang from time to time with the command center's battle situation through the surface radio. Although the Imperial Army's speed was fast, under the resistance of the Federation's defense line, there was no way to stop the motorcade's advance. Through the old man, Su Lu had learned about the specifics of the battle earlier than anyone else in the convoy. He narrowed his eyes and silently looked at the military vehicles and the soldiers in the vehicles. He suddenly confirmed one thing: the target of the Empire's people should be the girl behind him. 30 kilometers away from Zichou Airport, there was a branch intersection. There was still silence in the black car, but Su Li's face suddenly became extremely ugly. "What's wrong?" Jian Shui'er had been carefully observing his expression and asked softly. Su Lu didn't answer. What answered Jian Shui'er was the military's urgent notification in the system: Zichou Airport was raided by the Empire's fleet. The warships were seriously damaged and unable to take off. The landing platforms were completely destroyed. The battle damage is being assessed. In the dark night, the long motorcade stopped because of this unexpected situation. After 2 seconds of absolute silence, the Major General's cold and unquestionable voice came from the system: "According to the backup plan, the motorcade will turn to Luoqiu Airport." Most of the vehicles in the motorcade began to roar again, preparing to turn to the right side. However, the 7 military vehicles of the 7th Group were like silent stones, stopping on the right side of the road. They didn't have the intention to set off, because the black car had been silent and still. The Major General's angry voice sounded, "Lieutenant Colonel Su, why don't you start immediately?" Su Lu held the steering wheel with both hands and narrowed his eyes. He looked at the determined but still young faces of the soldiers in the military vehicles in front of him and suddenly asked, "You know you are bait?" He didn't use the communication system, so this sentence was naturally directed to Jian Shui'er. The girl tightened the clothes on her body as if she was a little afraid of the cold, and gently nodded. Su Lu was silent for a few seconds, pressed the earpiece in his ear and said to everyone, "I have a different opinion." The north-south boundary of Planet 5460 was not the actual defense line. Between the defense positions of the Federation and the Empire, there was a buffer zone of about 120 kilometers wide. Therefore, when the Imperial Expeditionary Force fiercely advanced southward, the plains and hills in front of them did not suffer any powerful counterattacks at all. The Imperial Expeditionary Force with the black hibiscus-flying military flag was like countless vicious beasts that had been hungry and thirsty for many years. They greedily and stubbornly pounced toward the water source. The mixed brigade of heavy armor and Moon Wolf mecha turned into a black torrent, coldly but fanatically crushing line after line of defense. Accompanied by flames that soared into the sky and destruction all over the ground, they continued southward, and continued southward. The federal military had long been mentally prepared for the surprise attack of the Imperium's Expeditionary Army. However, they still did not expect that the Imperium's Expeditionary Army would actually launch an attack with all its members. This was definitely not a surprise attack, but a full-scale push that was close to staking everything on a single throw. He Zi was a company commander of the Sheji Mountain defense position. Covered in dust, he pushed away the corpses of his orderlies in front of him and shouted into the communication device with a hoarse voice, "We need backup, we need backup." His orderlies died in the previous intensive airstrikes of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, and the microdrones of the Empire buzzing above his head were like troublesome locusts, constantly interfering with the Federal Army's wireless communication. The ground began to shake. He Zi's eyes were red as he looked at the countless armored vehicles that appeared on the hill. He helplessly put down the communication device in his hand, and then a fierce expression appeared on his face. He walked in front of the main cannon of the Gongzi and said to the cannoneer in a deep voice, "The mecha reinforcements are still 12 kilometers away, now it's up to you." From the company commander to the normal soldiers, looking at the Empire's armored vehicles and the ferocious black mechas that covered the hill, they already knew that they could not hold this line of defense, but they did not have the slightest bit of fear in their hearts. Even if they did not show it on their angry and twisted faces. The Gongzi's main cannon under the control of the company's cannoneer team shook violently, and beautiful cannon fire spewed out in a straight line. With a loud boom, one of the Empire's armored vehicles exploded into pieces under the unstoppable attack. Meanwhile, the armored vehicle behind it was also flipped over by this blast and fell heavily to the ground, almost smashing into a Moon Wolf mecha with a ghostly figure, turning it into several tons of black dirt. Electronic interference, virtual bait, dazzling artillery fire, high-speed chariots, and strange mechas formed a thrilling scene in this valley. A black shadow flashed past, and the heavy Moon Wolf mecha successfully avoided the cannon fire of the Federation's position and rushed up the hill. Company Commander He Zi hugged the heavy carbine machine and shouted as he pulled the trigger on the mecha that was close to him. Beautiful bullets spewed out, and countless dull sounds of metal splashing rang out. However, it was all in vain. The Empire's Moon Wolf mecha stepped heavily on his body, and at the same time, its right mechanical arm stabbed out with an alloy blade, ruthlessly stabbing into the weakest part of the Gongzi's main cannon. Under the heavy and huge mecha, the dull sound of heavy machinery still rang out, but after a short moment, it abruptly stopped. The Black Moon Wolf mecha did not stop at all, and continued to move silently towards the south where there were still scattered resistance. Behind it, the Empire's armored soldiers surged past, leaving behind countless ruins and corpses all over the ground. Countless similar scenes played out in the valley and plains of this planet. The bloody and cruel war did not give people the time to reflect on its characteristics, and it had already brought death and defeat. The Federation's headquarters located in the base was busy, whether it was the lieutenant commander or the officers who were monitoring the movements of the Imperial Expeditionary Force through the electronic monitoring network, sending specific battlefield data to the various troops. Their expressions were exceptionally heavy and ugly. Since yesterday, the Federation's planetary headquarters had raised the defense level of the frontline to the highest level. The highest-ranking officers had long guessed the Imperial Expeditionary Force's plan, but who would have thought that, under the premise of sufficient preparation, the Imperial Expeditionary Force would still advance so fiercely and so quickly? Are the people of the Empire crazy? They actually took out all of their assets. What is Umbury planning? The Federation's frontline commander, Lieutenant General Nelson, looked at the battle situation screen with a pale face, looking at the direction of the light that made him feel endless anger and humiliation, and he slammed the table heavily and shouted, "Inform Hong Yujing to immediately suppress the defense line behind Mount Xiaoji. We must not let the enemy break through. Commander, the fleet must first ensure the safety of the spaceport," a staff officer reminded him worriedly. "I understand," Lieutenant General Nelson slowly calmed down and said, "but she will also understand." The federal military had always thought that the military leader of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the north, Old General Umbre, was only using this seemingly exaggerated full-scale attack to cover up a certain 1,000-mile surprise attack that they were determined to win. However, the reality was not so. The Imperial general with deep military wisdom, after accepting the Emperor's random order, actually found a way out of the impossible. He used a full-scale attack to cover up the 1,000-mile surprise attack, but wasn't he also using that surprise attack to cover up this decisive and terrifying full-scale attack? The Federal Army was very likely to fall into a situation where they could only focus on one thing and lose the other. Chapter 407. There was a line between the north and south of planet 5460. This line originally only existed on military maps. Other than the fortifications hidden in the mountains and high-strength cement buildings, this line did not have any obvious markings. However, on this night, countless explosions, smoke clouds, and light clearly outlined this line. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack spread out on 2/3 of the circular line. Most of the attacks were concentrated in the night area. The dense flames rang out against the black background, appearing particularly dazzling. It was as if a god had tied a beautiful belt around the waist of this planet. The belt was decorated with sparkling rubies. Every shining ruby represented a violent explosion. The Federation's light feather fleet looked down on this scene from high above. They gracefully turned around in space, and the bow of the ship lowered, rushing down toward the belt that was filled with the will of death and blood. Countless missiles from both the north and south rose into the air. In the dark side of the planet, they drew out slender and mesmerizing rays of light. After the Federation Space Fleet released the first batch of all-terrain fighters, they maintained a close distance. They did not dare to get too close to the atmosphere. The bow of the ship slowly adjusted. The inside of the 7 battleships began to emit a low but powerful roar. The light became dim. The huge energy output by the crystal multi-engine began to move toward the main cannon base according to the established channel. Main cannon ready to fire. Main cannon in position. Major General Hong Yujing looked at the light screen in front of her. She raised her right hand and said calmly, "Expand the O-shaped radius by 700%. The adjutant was stunned. "The lethality will be reduced by a lot. What we need is to help the ground forces get through this most difficult period." Major General Hong Yujing lowered her eyes and said, "The most important thing is the lethality area. Even if we blast the opponent's mecha into smoke, what effect will it have on the overall situation?" No one said anything else. In the current situation where crystal mines were scarce, the fleet that should have been the most terrifying force in the universe had an innate sorrow. The battleships had a huge power that the ground forces could not resist, but they did not have enough energy to support it and turn this power into victory. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. The countdown for the Federal Fleet's main cannon ended. The battleships floating in the dark side of the planet instantly entered some kind of absolute stillness. In addition to the palpitating silence in the universe, it was as if the entire world had stopped moving. More than 10 pillars of light shot out from the bases of the 7 warships. These beams of light looked so slender and delicate. They were silent, like flashlights shining into a lake. They gently passed through the planet's dark atmosphere and landed on the surface. The beam of light, which appeared to be thin in space, had expanded to an area of thousands of square meters when it landed on the ground. The sound finally rang out. Countless heavy-duty armored vehicles and Moon Wolf mechas from the Empire instantly exploded, overturned, and disintegrated into countless broken metal components, splashing in all directions under the punishment white light that descended from the sky. In order to expand the attack area, the Federal fleet deliberately increased the area and reduced the degree of damage. If it was just to accurately hit a target, there would definitely be a lot of terrifying scenes of the Empire's heavy equipment being vaporized on planet 5460. Just like that time in the outskirts of the capital of Heshi State in the Donglin region, the beam of light that descended from the sky instantly turned the black M52 mecha controlled by Fengyu into a puff of green smoke. Because of the Federal fleet's attack, the beautiful belt on the planet instantly bloomed with 10 light clusters. The ruby-shaped explosion clusters that represented the fierce ground attack were instantly overshadowed by these light pillars that descended from the sky. Report from the command center: the effect of the outer layer attack is very significant. The excited voices of the Federation staff officers sounded in the battleships. They waved their fists in the air and looked at the images on the ground transmitted from the satellite. They looked at the huge gaps that were forcefully blasted open by the battleships of the Imperial Expeditionary Force and the charred metal debris that sputtered around the gaps. They were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. The fierce attack of the 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was severely hindered under the precise attack of the Federation Space Fleet. At that moment, the battle had already entered the second line of defense of the Federation. The Federal Army finally managed to block the continuous attacks of the Imperial Expeditionary Force with the help of powerful defensive firepower. Countless heavy armor units of the Empire were destroyed in the valleys and plains. Countless Moon Wolf mechas were hit by the electromagnetic missiles of the fighter jets. Their bodies flashed with a terrifying blue light as they were forced to fall. Then, the small teams of the Federation attacked the infantrymen. They used shoulder-fired rocket launchers to bombard the infantrymen non-stop. At the same time, the sturdy defense of the Federation also suffered a fierce attack that they had never experienced in the past 10 years. The fearless Imperial Expeditionary Force used all of their missiles and main cannons to continuously overturn the high-strength cement walls. Tens of thousands of tons of soil were continuously thrown into the air. The concentrated bullets hit any protruding objects on the surface of the ground, making horrible sounds. Who knew how many soldiers were turned into dust under this kind of firepower? The 3 mecha brigades will be here soon. The second wave of attack from the missile base is ready. Major General Hong Yujing frowned as she looked at the markings on the screen. She confirmed that the fleet had already helped the command center stabilize the situation. Although the attacks of the Empire were still as terrifying as ever, with the follow-up forces of the Federation catching up, they could at least hold the third line of defense. Right at that moment, the radar system of the light feather battleship suddenly emitted a sharp alarm. The quiet space was still quiet. There were no signs of the enemy. Why did the alarm sound? Major General Hong Yujing quickly walked back to her seat. Her expression was abnormally cold. She said to the entire fleet, "Electronic interference detected. Everyone retreat. Leave the atmosphere immediately and enter the distant space." This Federation captain's reaction was not slow. However, although the 7 battleships that had just fired their main cannons did not need to undergo emergency cooling, the reactivation of their multicrystal engines still required 10 seconds. However, right at the 7th second, in the space above the Federal fleet at an angle of 345 degrees, a wolf's head with a metallic luster appeared. The wolf's head seemed slow, but in reality, it was extremely fast. Only after leaving the ionization cloud's concealment could one see clearly that it was the head of a black battleship. Gradually, 1, 2, 3, a total of 17 Empire Night Wolf-class battleships appeared in the upper half of the Federal fleet's airspace. They rapidly pressed down. The Expeditionary Army's only Empire Royal Fleet, why would they appear here? Major General Hong Yujing's right hand was tightly clenched. She was extremely shocked, but her face did not reveal any emotion. She quickly and clearly issued a high-speed evacuation order to the entire fleet. Right now, the Federal fleet was in near-Earth space, facing the Empire's fleet tens of thousands of kilometers away. Countless of them made effective evasive maneuvers. Although the offensive ability of the Empire's battleships was far inferior to the Federal fleet's, Major General Hong Yujing knew that in front of these beasts of the Empire that even dared to engage in space collisions and perish together, if they did not immediately leave the near-Earth space and rely on the Federal fleet's high speed to enter outer space, her own fleet would very likely be dragged into the Empire's battleships and perish together. The overflow of the number 3 furnace's number 2 furnace is at 8%. Fleet, form the Kimura formation. Hurry! Urgent shouts rang out from the Federal fleet. In the silent space, the two fleets unexpectedly encountered each other, but neither launched an attack first. They only raised their speed to the maximum and began to chase after each other. The reason the Empire's fleet did not launch an attack was very simple. The crude main cannons of their battleships, in the large-scale space environment, even if they hit the Federation's battleships, would not immediately cause real damage to the Federation's super-thick alloy armor. The reason the Federal fleet did not launch an attack was that the energy quota of the battleships was seriously insufficient. They had to save the energy that was not used to maintain the operation of the battleships for the most critical moment. The Federal fleet had the advantage of speed, but the Empire's fleet that should never appear here had the advantage of numbers and positioning. The timing of the appearance of the Night Wolf fleet was especially perfect. The Federal fleet's main cannons had just been fired and were still in the near-Earth space. The silent chase was an extremely dangerous chase. If the Federal fleet was really closed in by the enemy, then they would certainly blossom into a cluster of fireworks above the planet. Break away from the Level 1 gravitational interference. The command and control system of the Light Feather class battleship issued a timely voice. The soldiers of the Federal fleet that had been silent and tense for 3 minutes all breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. They subconsciously wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads. As long as they left the near-Earth space, with the speed of the Empire's fleet, there was no way they could catch up with them. Continue to break away from the Level 2 gravitational interference. However, Major General Hong Yujing did not relax. Her eyes were as sharp as knives as she stared coldly at the light screen. Looking at the Night Wolf fleet of the Empire that was changing their formation, she knew that the enemy would definitely not let her go. The situation was still dangerous. 7 Empire's battleships have left. The deputy commander shouted in shock, "What are they trying to do? Are they trying to die?" "General, I suggest that we immediately release the battleships and launch a sniper attack against the enemy." "What are they trying to do?" Major General Hong Yujing looked at the Empire's fleet that was changing their formation 100,000 kilometers away. Her heart was heavy. Suddenly, she said in a cold voice, "Inform the ground command that the Empire's fleet is heading towards Zaiqiu spaceport." Hearing this, the Federation officers that were busy in the command hall froze at the same time. They turned around and looked at her in disbelief. "Inform the ground command that our fleet has been forced to leave the near-Earth space and is in a state of entanglement with the enemy. We can't support the spaceport. Tell them to prepare to face the enemy." Major General Hong Yujing slowly lowered her head and said softly, "Or retreat." The head of the Empire's Night Wolf battleships was a wolf's head with a metallic luster. It definitely did not fit the design concept of space combat, but it was the nightmare of countless Federation battleships. This was because the Empire's people who were not afraid of death would often use this wolf's head to play the game of perishing together with the enemy. The commander of the Night Wolf fleet, Fu Ding, looked at the surface that was getting closer and closer. He said calmly, "Attack the spaceport, release the battleships, and open up a path for the mecha team." Our goal is to capture Jian Shuai alive for His Majesty. The Night Wolf fleet appeared like a ghost. They only used 2 changes of speed to successfully force the Federal fleet into outer space. It had to be said that this commander's commanding skills had already reached the realm of perfection. Normal tactics, just because of his perfect grasp of timing, brought the dawn of victory to the Empire. He rubbed his blonde curly hair and looked at the planet's night zone that was filled with flames. He smiled and said, "My fleet is not here to be a guest." Chapter 408. There was no moon in Planet 5460. The side of the sky facing away from the star was only filled with stars. The night here was very quiet, as dark as ink. But tonight, the sound of explosions on the planet never stopped. The edge of the dark wilderness that stretched into the distance lit up from time to time. It looked like lightning, but in fact, it was countless advanced weapons releasing their energy, lighting up half of the sky. The same was true at Luochio spaceport. The sound of explosions and light were even more intense. The Imperial Royal Fleet that quietly came to the rescue of Planet 5460 began to waste their energy from the edge of the atmosphere. One of the largest spaceports in the Federation had fallen into a sea of fire. The fleet named Night Wolves did not take advantage of the situation to attack Luochio spaceport further away. Just like in the ancient wars of the Empire, the blonde commander firmly implemented the policy of encirclement. In addition to the bombardment of the main artillery, the attack on the spaceport relied more on the fighters released by the fleet. Hundreds of black all-terrain fighters could be faintly seen in the night. Like tiny black mosquitoes, they moved swiftly between the anti-air artillery and the rapidly sweeping illuminating lamp posts on the Federation's ground. From time to time, a fighter would be tragically hit by a missile, dragging a long tail of light as it tragically plunged to the ground. However, even if they were hit, the fighter pilots of the Imperial fleet still incomparably valiantly controlled the fighter to fall toward the command center of Luochio spaceport, using their own deaths to deal the final damage to the Federal Army. These Imperial pilots did not parachute. The Federal military on the ground was not surprised by this desperate attack. Because in their battlefield experience, the people of the Empire had always been this kind of lunatic who did not care about their lives. The fighter groups of the Federation had already taken to the air and launched an attack in just a few minutes. In the night sky in the southwest direction, the sharp sound of air turbulence and fireworks-like explosions rang out from time to time. 30 kilometers away, the spaceport road was very quiet. The long convoy stopped silently on the side of the road. People watched the war and the tragic situation at the spaceport. No one was willing to speak, especially now that there seemed to be some kind of disagreement within the team. This is the backup plan of the Ministry of Defense. Your opinion is reserved. The Major General ran out of the black car and shouted angrily at Su Lu, "Hurry up. What are you still doing here?" Su Lu turned off the electronic map on the car's central control system. He held the steering wheel with both hands and remained silent for a second. He turned around and said something to Jian Shuai. He then opened the car door and stood on the cement road. He said to the Major General, "If we're going to Luochio Airport, I don't think we need to go with so many people." The battle on the planet's surface had already broken out. Su Lu already knew what the federal military wanted to do. Although he did not understand why the military was so sure that Jian Shuai was attractive to the Empire, he was sure that Jian Shuai was the bait, and he, Group 7, and the entire battalion of soldiers would encounter unprecedented danger on their way to Luochio spaceport. He knew very well that his identity was a military officer that had to obey orders. However, he could not watch the entire mechanical division fall into the encirclement of the Imperial Expeditionary Force just to protect himself and Jian Shuai. He was still wearing the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. No one knew that his left pupil was slightly narrowed at this moment. He was communicating with the old man. From the attack on Luoqiu spaceport and the direction of the Imperial Expeditionary Forces attack, the Empire was very clear about Jian Shui'er's location. The old man only used a very short amount of time to find out that the signal interruption station of the Federation TV station was probably hacked by the Empire's electronic forces. However, at this moment, countless miniature surveillance aircraft of the Empire covered the southern hemisphere sky like a flock of birds. In a short amount of time, the federal military could not eliminate all of them. However, these troublesome little things designed by the Empire's scientists to break through the glory of the Charter, combined with the Empire's military satellites that were forcefully changing their orbits, could accurately find the target they were looking for. The Federation's electronic surveillance network in the southern hemisphere was only 40% complete. There was no way to completely block this fleeing convoy in this tense moment. We all know what the plan of the Ministry of National Defense is. In that case, I'll take Jian Shui'er there. Su Le took off his sunglasses and said to the general. Then he turned around and gave an order to Group 7 subordinates. Gu Shifeng, get ready to warm up. Gu Shifeng, who was an expert in data processing, paused for a moment. She put the Cayenne light machine gun in front of her behind her back and quickly ran to the heavy multi-axle truck behind the black car. She jumped onto the truck and turned on the electronic valve. A low humming sound came from the truck. At the same time, the top of the truck began to move to the side. What are you doing? A trace of anger appeared in the eyes of the Major General. He moved closer to him and said hurriedly, "Who do you think you are? Without the protection of the mechanical division, do you think you can take Miss to Luoqiu safely? Are you out of your mind?" Hearing the word Miss, Su Luo was even more certain that this Major General must be a direct subordinate of the Feiqing faction. At this point, everyone was very clear about the dangers ahead and the real intention of the military to use them as bait. I insist on my opinion. Su Luo took 2 steps back and opened the back door of the black car. He took Jian Shui'er out and said in a low voice, "The military can ignore the lives of these hundreds of soldiers, but they can't just watch this happen. The most important thing is, I think that if I take Miss Jian Shui'er away alone, I have a higher chance of success." At this moment, time was very urgent. The Major General's face was extremely ugly. He grabbed Su Li's vest and said in a low voice, "Bullshit. Do you know how big of a risk the department took to come up with this plan? If Miss gets hurt, how will the entire Department of Defense answer to this? I personally brought the strongest battalion to escort you there, and I don't even have the slightest chance of success. How dare you say you have the slightest chance of success?" Su Lu was not blinded by personal heroism, but his engineer's logic told him that on this planet that was already filled with the flames of war, taking Jian Shui'er away alone was the best choice. The MX mecha on the truck had already finished heating up. Under the protection of the glory of the Charter, he firmly believed that no matter how strong the Empire was, no matter how far-sighted their plans were, they would not be able to stop him. An MX mecha was naturally useless against the terrifying attacks of the Empire, but it was an unparalleled weapon when used to escape. As a general, I order you to get in the car and leave immediately. The Major General reprimanded angrily. Su Lu allowed the Major to grab his shirt. He lowered his head to look at the time and said, "In the electronic secret order you showed me earlier, I am the one with the highest authority for this plan. The fact that the Department of Defense gave me this mecha means that the old man already guessed what I would choose." He took Jian Shui'er's hand and said with certainty. He cared about the life and death of this battalion of soldiers, but the generals in the command center cared more about Jian Shui'er's life and death. This did not mean that the Federation and the old man were cold-blooded, but it was the natural reaction of the people who commanded the war. The general's arm stiffened. "Do you think that you alone are stronger than an entire mecha division? Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, wake up." Su Lu ignored him. He held Jian Shui'er's hand and walked towards the heavy-duty truck. The young girl who was being held by Su Lu remained silent, obediently not saying a word. She let Su Lu handle everything, but there was a hint of curiosity and shock in her large eyes. Bai Yulan, bring the box over. When they walked past the military vehicles of Team 7, Su Lu looked at the handsome man beside the car and said. Bai Yulan frowned and threw the cigarette butt in his hand onto the road. He had already vaguely guessed something, but he was not willing to let Su Lu take the risk alone. The entire Team 7 did not want this guy to be some stupid hero. Seeing Bai Yulan's hesitation, Su Lu glared at him angrily and said loudly, "Bring it over." The non-combatants were still in the vehicles, watching the fierce battle in the southwest direction with their bodies trembling. The Team 7 combatants and an entire battalion of soldiers had already gotten out of the vehicles. They looked at the young man and woman who were climbing onto the heavy-duty truck with complicated eyes. The general in charge of this plan looked at this scene with a gloomy face. It seemed that he had not decided whether to stop or not. The roof of the heavy-duty multi-axle truck had been opened. A black MX mech in a moving state was like a sleeping steel giant, waiting to be awakened by its master. Accompanied by a soft but incomparably familiar hydraulic sound, the cockpit door at the chest of the mech opened. Su Lu threw the black box inside and stepped on the protruding metal platform. He turned around and extended his right hand to the girl below. He asked, "You know very well that there are two paths. Returning to the command center is naturally safe. If we want to go to Luoqiu Airport, there are only the two of us. Without a doubt, this is a risk. Do you want to take the risk with me?" Jian Shubai raised her head and looked at Su Li's slightly narrowed eyes. Suddenly, she found that the young man standing on the black mech's originally ordinary face had become more attractive. Without hesitation, she reached out her soft little hand with a smile and placed it in Su Li's hand. There was a flurry of gunfire. The signal relay vehicle of the Federation TV station was blasted into a pile of debris. Xiong Linquan looked at his masterpiece with satisfaction. He lifted the heavy Dahlon machine that was still spinning at high speed and turned back to salute the leader of the truck. Sitting in the cockpit of the mech, Su Lu completed the final self-check of the MX mech with a calm expression. Before he closed the hatch, he suddenly said to the young girl squeezed beside him who was as obedient as a cat, "The people of the Empire want to capture you. They must be watching you from the sky right now. Aren't you going to say hello?" Jian Shui'er widened her eyes and finally could not help but burst out laughing. She supported herself on his shoulder and stood up. Then, she waved her hand at the starry sky in the cockpit of the mecha. The alloy hatch closed. The multiple engines at the waist of the black MX mech instantly started up. The powerful output made the air begin to ripple. The soldiers in the cockpit all had different expressions, but they were all silent. They felt the heavy pressure from the heavy-duty multi-axle truck to the ground. They felt extremely nervous. With a muffled bang, the heavy-duty truck with an astonishing load was like a falling-apart building. Its tires burst and dust flew everywhere. It crashed heavily onto the hard surface of the road. Chapter 409. Let me first explain a little about the plot. The previous chapter's name wasn't originally this. The original chapter's name was cooler, but when I uploaded it, I suddenly remembered Sakai Noriko's song. The sentence that left the deepest impression on me was, "For you, I want to take risks." So I used that as the chapter's name. Back to Jian Shui'er's concert. The first song I wrote for her was from Su Jiaying's album. I changed the birthday gift to a New Year gift because it was written on the 31st. The second song, Jian So and So, was obviously written on the spot after listening to Tan Weiwei's song that night. Lyrics aren't difficult to write. Although this song was poorly written, it was because I wrote it in one breath. I didn't change the lyrics at all. Tan was actually quite interesting, but when Wei Wei sang Old Chui's song, it felt wrong. When Yuan Weiren sang it, it was even more wrong. If a friend wants to ask me to write lyrics and get royalties, feel free to look for me. I'm actually the most confident when it comes to writing lyrics. When I listened to Do Wei more than 10 years ago, I was determined not to look at the lyrics. I thought it was very beautiful, but when I looked at the lyrics, I thought, it should be better, right? So I wrote a few songs at that time. I'm really confident in this aspect, but I never had the chance to show it. In my next book, I might write a lot of lyrics and then indicate the copyright. Can I satisfy my fascination with the literary circle? Finally, I'll start soliciting votes. It's said that I can only write in the middle of the night. It's true, but this isn't a good thing. I've made you wait for a long time. Recently, I've been really busy. Last month, there were more than 10 days before the third watch. Now, when the monthly votes are doubled, I can't come out. This is really sad, but everyone can understand. It's not that I don't want to write more votes, but I really don't have the time. The summary was wrong. I didn't write much, and the monthly votes did rise slowly. But Xiao So was still resentful of being left behind, overtaken and overtaken. Chapter 410. In the distant night sky, dazzling flames flashed. More than 500 soldiers of the Federation sat on their respective armored vehicles, looking into the distance with a trace of admiration and worry, looking at a certain place where the black mecha had disappeared in the distance. The mechanical division aimed at the heavy truck with the howitzers and more powerful weapons. Because the truck suddenly collapsed and the target left at high speed, they naturally stopped firing. The white-haired Major General stood in the middle of the road with a complicated expression. After a difficult struggle, he finally didn't order his subordinates to use force to stop the reckless Su Lu. Connect me to the command center. No, connect me to the Ministry of Defense. He quickly walked to the military vehicle and asked the adjutant to connect the military satellite phone. He roared angrily, "Tell Zhou Yingxing that Brat kidnapped the young miss. If anything happens to the young miss, I will hold him responsible." The men of Group 7 carried their heavy weapons and began to prepare to leave with heavy expressions. Bai Yulan's delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted together. She exchanged a look with Lan Xiaolong beside her, but in the end, they didn't say anything. Their mission this time was to protect Jian Shuier, and they had to protect Su Lu, but now, the two people they were supposed to protect had abandoned them. In the shortest amount of time, 30 kilometers northeast of Zaiqiu Spaceport, what happened on the quiet road was transmitted to the 5460 Federation Command Center and the Federal Fleet in space. Major General Hong Yujing slowly took off her military cap and used her fingers to comb her hair. She wasn't very worried about the 7 Night Wolf battleships. The fleet under her command was about to leave the second gravitational range. At that time, no matter how fearless the Empire's battleships were, they wouldn't be able to threaten her fleet. The most important part of the plan this time seemed to have undergone some changes. In the Southern Hemisphere Command Base, Lieutenant General Nelson listened to the battle report with a serious expression. After a moment of silence, he said, "Help that mecha take care of the threat from the air. The problem on the ground can only be left to that young man. The remaining time of the electronic interference and the time it takes for the Federation to clean up those little things must be calculated immediately." In the circular base of the Imperium's Expedition Army in the Northern Hemisphere, inside the spacious underground command hall, more than 40 large light beams were displaying the images of countless cruel and heroic battles at night in the south. Without the help of near-orbit satellites in the Southern Hemisphere, the electronic surveillance of the Imperium's army mostly relied on the mini-unmanned electronically controlled aircraft that they called Little Things. Therefore, the images were often distorted and blurred. The Federation has already shot down 2 of the 3 orbit-changing satellites. After the Norman officer gave the order to the computer, he picked up the phone and shouted to the electronic troops in the distance, "No matter what the results of the calculation are, the electronic interference 32 degrees to the south, you must hold." He put down the phone and unfastened the top button of his military uniform in annoyance. This was because he knew very well that the electronic troops that sneaked along the valley to the demarcation line were actually taking a huge risk. The Federation would definitely choose them as the main target. No one knew how long the advantage in electronic warfare would last. The battle started in the middle of the night. The Imperial armies attacked the south with irresistible force. This was because the Imperial military headquarters went beyond the Federation's expectations. At the very beginning of the battle, they threw all their resources at the southern defensive position. The weapons and the soldiers' willpower that they had been accumulating for 10 years surged out in an instant, catching the Federation off guard. In the words of the Expeditionary Forces commander, Old General Ambly, in front of a righteous army, any conspiracy would be crushed into powder by the Empire's iron stream before it could ferment. However, when the Empire's armored torrent attacked the middle area between the second and third defensive line in the southern hemisphere, the advantage of the Federal Army's weapons began to gradually reveal itself. This was especially so when the Empire's powerful and precise counterattack was deployed. This made the Imperial officers in the base feel a little worried. After the initial defeat, the Federal Army was actually able to accept the fact so quickly and methodically strengthen their defense and even organize a counterattack. This only proved that they were a little scared by the violent offensive of the Imperial armies in the beginning. However, secretly, the Federal Army was already prepared. The only orbit-changing satellite that survived the Federation's attack sent back another critical image. The Norman officer's dark blue eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. He quickly walked to the round table in the middle of the hall and saluted to the old general. He quickly said, "The target has already headed to Luocho Airport." This is completely in line with the tactical deduction of the General Staff Headquarters. Old General Ambly held the scalding hot teacup with both hands and nodded tiredly. From the tone of this subordinate, he knew that there must be more to it. But the specific situation is a little different. The Federation's command center sent an entire mechanical battalion to escort the concert team, but they are still in the same place. The one that left this time is only a single mech. The Norman officer used his fastest speed to turn on the hologram system on the table and brought up the previous image. He said hesitantly. Old General Ambly raised his head and looked at the blurry satellite image on the hologram table in front of him. In the image, on the road, nearly 100 Federation's heavy armored vehicles were silent and motionless. However, a black mech on a heavy truck was moving. He could vaguely see the hatch opening. The Imperial Expeditionary Forces must-kill target, the beautiful Federation national girl, was looking down and waving to the sky. Old General Ambly's cloudy eyes gradually revealed a trace of coldness. Only now did he realize that the Federal Army might have used the celebrity as bait. If this speculation was true, what kind of misfortune would befall the Empire's army? Just like how he didn't understand His Majesty's order to hunt down the Federation national girl, he also didn't understand why the Federal military dared to use such a bait. In fact, even the commanders of the Federal Army didn't understand the mystery behind this. This was a battle to the death between the Empire and the Federal Army. It was also a battle between the Federation's military god and the Empire's emperor. When fishing, if the fish is big enough, strong enough, and fast enough, it can eat the bait and swim away. Old General Ambly put down the teacup beside the chair and stood up. He looked at the electronic map and the image on the table and said calmly. He knew that his subordinates standing beside him, like him, had guessed the intentions of their counterparts in the Federation, but he didn't decide to give up. Because this was His Majesty's will. Even if he knew that the Federation in the south had set up a trap, Old General Ambly had no choice but to dive in headfirst. Not to mention, his troops had the ability and courage to do so. In order to not let us, the big fish, notice the problem, the fisherman was overconfident and cut the fishing line countless times thinner. If that's the case, let's eat the bait and cut the fishing line. I want to know, this pilot who dared to set foot on the road of escape alone, how arrogant is he, or is he a lunatic? The old general looked at the black mecha disappearing into the wilderness and smiled slightly. There was a hint of absolute confidence in his faint mocking tone. He ordered, "Begin the second phase of the plan." The staff officers beside him were hesitant because they knew very well what kind of terrible losses the second phase of the plan would bring to the Empire's expeditionary army. However, in front of His Majesty's will and the General's order, they had nothing to say. They could only accept. Closely monitor the line from Route 7 to Luochio Spaceport. Even if there are Federation troops there, I want to know how many people they can send. Add the backup brigade. We must ensure that when Moonwolf passes through that area, the Federation headquarters will be terrified of the Empire's attack and won't dare to send any troops to support them. The task of the frontline troops is to suppress and lead. No matter how many people the Federation buried there, we can't let them increase the number of people. After confirming that this might be a trap, old General Ambry only responded with a few simple orders. He leaned on the table and quietly looked at the colored dots on the electronic map. After a long moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. Tell Love that in order for his mecha brigade to complete the mission given by His Majesty, at least 20,000 brave Empire soldiers will die on this planet tonight. If he can't kill the target, he should know what to do." Hearing this, the officers of the Empire felt a chill in their hearts. However, when they thought of the super strength of the Moonwolf group and Captain Love, they calmed down a little. Old General Ambly was about to leave the command center when suddenly his white eyebrows trembled slightly. He turned around and said to the staff officer, "Check in the database. I feel that the black mecha from before is a little strange. It's the Federation's newest model, MX. One of the staff officers replied, "The model has been confirmed before, but there hasn't been more information, so the database can't provide the specific power and firepower parameters." Old General Ambly was silent for a moment. The slight discomfort in his heart grew stronger and stronger, but he didn't show it in front of his subordinates. He just waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, remember to ask Love to bring this MX back. This is a very important thing. Don't let that pilot self-destruct." The Imperial Expeditionary Army activated the second phase of the plan. The 17 armored regiments that were active in the southern hemisphere at night suddenly retracted their lines and gave up on the targets in front of them. They changed their attack routes and formed two arrowheads, charging towards two areas in the south. Although the 17 mecha divisions were extremely far away from each other, from their attack route, it was clear that they would arrive at the same area in the end. At the same time, the Imperial Expeditionary Force, which had been silently waiting behind the demarcation line, followed the scorched earth and pressed forward. At this point, except for the few troops left behind, the Maple Forest Alliance on Planet 5460 had pushed all of their attack forces to the southern hemisphere. Chapter 411. The dense array of cannons spewed out dazzling light. Over 1,000 high-speed cannons whistled through the sky every second and blasted toward the Imperial Iron Stream. The entire Earth was shaking. Such a dense amount of cannons had not appeared in this part of the universe for more than a decade. Tonight, it was suddenly unleashed in the belly of the planet. It made people tremble uncontrollably. The heavy armored vehicle charging at the front was hit by a dozen cannons in succession and exploded with a boom. The Imperial mecha hiding behind the chariot charged valiantly forward like a phantom. However, the air all around them was filled with high-speed spinning armor-piercing shrapnel like a torrential downpour. Even the highly mobile Night Wolf mecha had no way of displaying its mobility in front of such terrifying defensive firepower. It only managed to hold out for 3 more seconds before it was reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Boom! 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 In the following bombardment, the Night Wolf mecha was hit until sparks flew everywhere and its limbs were shattered. The empty hills were filled with sharp and terrifying screams. The Federation's defensive positions opened fire. The night sky was filled with fire and smoke, covering the sky and earth. Gradually, the smoke fell on the Imperial chariots and the corpses of the soldiers. However, before they could settle down, they were shaken up by even more violent explosions. However, in the thick smoke, the black hibiscus flag representing the Imperial royal family continued to flutter. Although the flag was already a bit old from the smoke, it still rolled in the wind. Facing the cannon fire, it coldly and silently moved forward. Forward. Another wave of group armor attacks. The Imperial army did not stop for a single step or breath. They completely ignored the chariot mecha that continuously turned into smoke and silently sent off their fallen comrades. Almost crazily, they charged toward the Federation's third line of defense. The situation on the battlefield was like a giant white wave in the dark sea. In the night of wild winds, it continuously slammed against the reefs of the coastline. The reefs looked incomparably sturdy, but the giant wave had no intention of retreating at all. It did not care that it would be smashed into pieces. The wave behind followed closely behind the wave, vowing to smash those black reefs into painful powder. On the annular belt of Planet 5460, there were more than a dozen scenes like this. The 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Forces Maple Forest Brigade were like 17 devils carrying black spears as they tried to pierce through the thickest defense line of the Federation. In a large-scale battle on the surface of a planet, the 17 armor clans seemed to be fighting from thousands of miles away, but in reality, they were all vaguely connected. The main direction of the Imperial army's attack was quietly moving in 2 different directions amidst the seemingly crazy and unreasonable attacks. The 17 black spears were about to become 2 giant arrows that could not be blocked. The Federation's defensive line, which had just stabilized, began to wobble in the face of this wave of attacks. Although the damage to the fleet in the sky was not great, they had to take off and land wave after wave to replenish their energy and ammunition. In the permanent fortifications on the ground, 23% of the main cannons had already been declared useless due to overuse. Even the high-density cannons, which had cost a lot of money, were about to enter a stage of energy instability because they had to continuously defend against the Imperial iron flow. There were even a few locations where the high-density cannons had already started to sound alarms. The officers of the Federation looked at the reckless Imperial iron flow on the holographic screen in anger and disbelief. Apart from being shocked, they were also endlessly puzzled. Why would the Imperial military attack at all costs? Under the attack of the Federation's three-dimensional defense system, they had to pay an incomparably terrible price for every step they took, but they were still attacking. Attacking without stopping. This kind of crazy attack was bound to bring about serious losses. Although the Federal Central Computer had not yet produced an evaluation report of the Imperial military's losses, just by looking at it, the frontline commander could confirm that at least 1/6 of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade's combat strength had been lost in an instant just like that. With the Federation's powerful defense system and advanced firepower arrangement, according to the current speed of the Maple Forest Brigade's loss, even if they were allowed to fight their way to the headquarters base, how many of them would be able to survive? The target of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was the Federation's planetary war zone headquarters. They shouted, "Long live His Majesty," and charged coldly toward death. In the end, they fell one after another and were buried in this faraway foreign land that was countless light years away from their homeland. The soldiers of the Empire would not equate stupidity with heroism. However, in order to complete His Majesty's mission, in order to fulfill the strategic objectives of the headquarters, from the most basic squad to the heavy-duty moon wolf mechas that attracted the attention of countless people, no one took a step back. In fact, they even thought for a second longer. If the four-layered three-dimensional defense system that the federal military had spent many years building was like a giant steel curtain that encompassed everything from the black grassland to the vast sky in the southern hemisphere, then the crazy and reckless group attack of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was like two fists at this moment, an indestructible cannon-fired giant fist. Looking at the density of the cannon fire in the wilderness and the firm determination of the Imperial Iron Stream charge, there was no doubt that old General Ambly in the Northern Hemisphere base would rather let these two fists completely destroy him in order to tear a hole in this steel curtain. The Maple Forest Brigade, who had been attacking from all directions, had already retracted their fingers into fists. The 17 armored regiments had become alloy fists with enormous strength. They fiercely smashed toward the Federation's defensive position, wanting to smash through the opponent and then smash toward the opponent's vital points. The 10 armored regiments were the right fist of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade. They sharply and wildly smashed toward the Federation's headquarters in the northeast of the planet's night zone. The remaining 7 regiments attacked the southwest, encircling and attacking. They fiercely smashed their fists toward the most important military base in the southern hemisphere. For the Federal Army, regardless of whether it was the headquarters or the military base, they were both absolutely important places that they had to defend. The headquarters was the brain of the army, while the military base was the heart of the Federal Army, providing them with an unending supply of nourishment. No matter what the initial design of the federal military was, and no matter whether or not Lieutenant General Narson could see through the military plan of the old general of the Imperium, the Federation had to adjust its defense strategy immediately in the face of the two violent, unreasonable, blood-stained fists that still contained terrifying power. It was necessary for the Federation to defend itself immediately and block the enemy's incessant attacks. The Federation's soldiers stepped on the corpses of their comrades. Countless pairs of scarlet eyes stared and loudly shouted. In the end, they didn't let the Empire's people break through in an instant. The steel curtain in the southern hemisphere, under the bitter resistance of the Federal Army, barely held on. However, near the equator, this steel curtain had already begun to distort and deform, revealing its weakest areas. At this moment, the Maple Forest Alliance's fully mechanized brigade, which was the last to enter the battlefield, fiercely charged towards the deformed steel curtain. The 17 armored divisions in charge of the fierce frontal assault were already bloody fists. The 30,000 Imperial Brigade was like a wolf's mouth. At this moment, they had already bared their ferocious white fangs and were about to take a bite. The direction of the wolf fang was the flat mountainous area between Ancho Airport and Luocho Airport. Old General Ambly held his teacup and calmly looked at the military intelligence report on the electronic map. After confirming that the Wolf Fang Brigade had entered the designated area, he took a deep breath. A trace of blood appeared on his slightly tired face. What should be done had been done. The rest was up to fate. The old general slightly bent his body and waved his hand to refuse the service officer to follow him. He silently walked out of the command hall, took the elevator, and came to the highest point of the circular base. Facing the cold wind of the northern hemisphere, he looked at the faint light of the southern hemisphere on the other side of the forest. The people of the Southern Federation definitely didn't expect him to be this crazy. You want to fish, but I'm going to break your fishing rod. Old General Ambly silently thought, but he knew that in the West Woods, in this Federation land, even if they could achieve some success tonight, as long as the Empire couldn't break through the Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor, the Expeditionary Army's only path back was death. A few months ago, when the Federation began to send more troops, the old general had already guessed what the Federal military, or rather the Federation's military god, was going to do. The Federation was going to start a war. Naturally, the first thing they wanted to do was to get rid of these unwelcome guests who came from afar. The expeditionary army's end would eventually come. The only reason they were able to hold on for a few decades was because the Empire's most deep-seated enemy had always kept the expeditionary army alive. Old General Ambly knew this better than the Federation's Ministry of Defense. They had been away from their homeland for more than a decade, and there was no way back. Now that they had received His Majesty's random order, they might as well go crazy. At the very least, they had to make the Federation pay a heavy price. Yes, tonight, the ferocious attack of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance could only be described as crazy. Although everyone in the universe knew about the bravery of the Empire's soldiers, the intensity of tonight's battle was still far beyond the expectations of the federal military. If the Southern Hemisphere was a trap, then the Imperial Expeditionary Force had used the craziest and bloodiest method to forcefully turn this situation into a chaotic situation. The Federation military had planned for this a long time ago, but they still suffered an incomparably heavy blow at the start of the war. It was precisely because they simply couldn't grasp the supreme commander of this regiment, or even the harshness and viciousness of this expeditionary army that was all alone in a foreign land. His Majesty had given a random order, and the expeditionary force fought a crazy battle. The terror and craziness made the Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere feel as if they were struck by lightning. They looked around and felt gloomy. A relieved smile appeared on Ambly's old face. He let go of his fingers and let the teacup that had accompanied him for many years fall off the high wall of the base. He couldn't hear the shattering sound in the dark night, but he still listened. It seemed that he could only hear the mournful cries of the young people in the Southern Hemisphere as they died. Like jade that is willing to break, but no longer willing to hide in the glacier. The old general looked to the south and murmured softly, "I can't take you back to your homeland alive, so I'll take your souls and the failure of the Federation." High-speed fighter jets swept past at low altitude. The dense cannons plowed a terrifying trail of deep gravel in the wilderness. The black MX was like a beast in the dark night. It moved quickly through the smoke and dust at an extremely high speed. The missiles fired by the 7 fighter jets at low altitude couldn't hit the strange trembling body of the mech, but they effectively slowed it down. With an extremely beautiful left turn, the black mech dodged a missile. It left a trail of afterimages in the wilderness as it sped toward a mountain range in front of it. Chapter 4:12. The air supremacy near Zachio spaceport was still being contested, but when he received the signal from the Maple Forest Alliance base in the Northern Hemisphere, the blonde Night Wolf Fleet Commander Fu Ding did not hesitate to order 10 high-speed Omni-Domain cruising fighter jets to speed towards the northeast. He did not care about the loss of ground attack power at all. The target of the fighter jets was a black mecha racing through the wilderness. This mecha was the source of the Empire military's operation this time. In the dimly lit cockpit, the smell of heavy oxygen released by the life support system was very clear. Su Li's left hand gripped the control stick tightly while the fingers of his right hand quickly swept across the touchscreen. In an instant, he entered 14 commands to control the Black MX to perform one dangerous yet beautiful standard evasive maneuver after another amidst the smoke and rain of bullets. The Empire's fighter jets in the night sky above his head were reflected in his eyes through the mecha's SCC system and large radius high-sensitivity radar in the helmet. When they had brushed past the northern area of Zachio spaceport earlier, these Empire's fighter jets had followed them and had been unable to shake them off. This fact made him very clear that the Empire's orbit-changing satellites were still watching him from outer space. The black box was fixed to the back of the cockpit, while Jian Shuai sat quietly beside him. It was not designed to be a two-person mecha, so the cockpit was slightly cramped. However, being chased by the Empire's fighter jets the entire way, the two of them were not in the mood to experience the stuffiness and cramping of the cockpit. Su Lo was not nervous at all. He only felt that it was a little troublesome. The fighter jets in the sky did not carry electromagnetic beam bombs, so it was basically impossible for them to hurt the extremely mobile MX. However, being chased like this by the enemy made him feel as if someone was holding a gleaming dagger behind him, ready to stab him at any moment. It made him feel unusually anxious. A sharp alarm came from the radar. Su Li's fingers entered commands as fast as lightning. With a push of the control stick with his left hand, the heavy black mecha was like an extremely nimble toy under his control. On the simple dirt path that was approaching the mountain, the mecha's thick mechanical legs suddenly sprang up and swept diagonally to the right, breaking a thin tree in half. With a whoosh, a heat sensor rocket fell from the sky. Just as the black MX mecha dove into the forest, it struck the already broken thin tree. Amidst the explosion, the mountain rocks cracked, and soil poured down in torrents. Very troublesome. Su Li thought silently in his heart. However, he still didn't want to use the simulation system. It wasn't because Jian Shui'er was sitting right beside him. It was because the military needed his mecha to be the bait. Then, in this escape plan, they couldn't just aim to escape to Luoqiu Airport. The real danger was hidden in the simulation of this battle. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle rang out in the skies. A silver-white shadow rushed out from the faint clouds in the skies to the west, flying past the black mecha's head and towards the rear at high speed. The mecha's friend or foe identification system instantly determined that this was a fighter from the Federation. The black MX mech advanced at high speed without turning back. The radar transmitted the scene behind it to the holographic screen of the cockpit. Several blinding lights flashed across the night sky. It should be the large-caliber cannons firing. The Federation's fighter jet that came to support deftly lifted its angle in the air and instantly shot down the Empire's fighter jet that had been following behind Su Li the whole time. On the holographic screen, the Empire fighter fell to the ground with green smoke billowing out of it. The Federation fighter flapped its wings slightly in greeting to the mecha on the ground. A grateful smile appeared on Su Li's face. His finger tapped the touch screen. The black mecha that was running at high speed gave a thumbs up to the night sky where the aerial battle had just occurred. However, the next moment, in the night sky behind the mecha, a few more Empire mecha joined the fray. Although the Federation mecha that had come to provide support valiantly destroyed one of the Empire mecha, it was ultimately outnumbered and turned into a firework in the night sky. The smile on Su Li's face instantly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and continued to operate in silence. Like the Empire Fleet Commander, the air combat forces of the Federation's Ichio spaceport, although they were also in the midst of a dangerous offensive and defensive battle, still sent out more than 10 fighters to cover the black mecha's escape. Both sides knew very well who was inside this black mecha and what its significance was. With the valiant cover of the Federation fighters, the black MX mech finally shook off the pursuit and harassment of the Empire from the air. It turned into a black stream of fire, passing through the primeval forest and stepping over the black plains, heading towards the spaceport in the distance at high speed. There was a simple military road in the middle of the plains. The black mecha broke out of the forest and sprinted across the grass. The moment its heavy body landed on the surface of the road, it began to change its state. The thick alloy mechanical legs flipped over and closed together with the sound of hydraulic compression and motors. The side armor automatically pushed out a caterpillar mechanism, and the spherical joints turned into power linkage equipment. A loud grinding sound rang out on the road. The black mecha instantly entered full-speed movement mode. The caterpillar tracks rotated at high speed under the power of the powerful engine, tearing apart the shallow layer of hard concrete on the surface of the road. It carried with it a cloud of dust as it moved forward into the night. The black mecha's mode changes were all completed at high speed, without the slightest hint of deceleration. There was a palpitating sense of simplicity and beauty in its movements. The lighting in the cockpit was dim. Su operated in silence, his fingers continuously entering commands and activating buttons. Although each of his actions did not appear to be fast, when put together, there was a fairly clear sense of rhythm. No matter how difficult the operation was, he showed no signs of panic. Jian Shui'er checked the high-strength laces on her body, using a smile to hide the nervousness in her heart. She reflexively turned to look at him. The two of them were sitting very close to each other. Although the lighting in the cockpit was dim, she could clearly see this man's thick, knife-like eyebrows and that pair of permanently narrowed eyes when she turned her head. The Empire's offensive is fierce. The third line of defense is having a hard time holding on. But you don't have to worry. As long as the fighters behind us can't catch up, at least on this road to Luoqiu, our mecha will be safe. Su took off his helmet and calmed the slight feeling in his heart. He said in a low voice, both the Empire and the Federation have made the wrong judgment. If we go full speed ahead, I can guarantee that before the Empire breaks into this area, we will be able to send you to Luoqiu spaceport. He was the designer of the MX. He knew the functions of this black mecha better than the staff officers of the Federation's Department of Defense. Especially after discovering the small note under the right touchscreen, he had infinite confidence in this black MX. But you and I both know that our mecha is bait. So, I'm sorry. I can't go full speed ahead. You will have to continue taking risks with me. The Federal Central Computer, which was that old thing, was connected directly to Su Li's brain. He could even know everything that was happening on this planet faster than the Federation's frontline command. Although he couldn't completely understand the entire battle situation on this planet, he could at least calculate some of the problems. At least we don't have to worry about anything now. He pointed at the map on the screen and explained to Jian Shui'er, we will arrive at the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge in about 4 hours. In these 4 hours, we will be safe. Okay. Jian Shui'er nodded. She was very obedient and didn't say anything. She didn't want to disturb his operation. Ever since she had received the military's request, this national girl knew that her frontline concert tour would definitely be a journey filled with unknown dangers. Right now, she was running with Su Lu alone on the road of escape. Naturally, she was nervous. But for some reason, seeing Su Li's silent and precise operation, her hard-to-suppress nervousness gradually calmed down. In order to conserve energy, after entering full speed mode, Su Lu had shut down some unnecessary functions of the mecha's life support system. The temperature in the cockpit was gradually rising, and the dim lighting seemed to contain an endless sense of dryness. The straps can be undone. We will be safe for more than 3 hours. You can trust in my judgment. The sweat on his body had soaked his clothes. Su Lu felt a little uncomfortable, especially with the girl's body pressed tightly against him. The feeling was slightly awkward. Jian Shui'er grunted and obediently undid the straps. She didn't ask where his confidence in her safety came from. She took off the black summer jacket that Su Lu had draped over her. Raising her arm, she wiped the sweat off her face. Because of the heat, her cheeks were flushed red. The cockpit fell silent once more. Only the low rumble of the mecha's twin engines and the occasional rise and fall of the tracks against the ground could be heard. Say something. Su Lu cautiously observed the darkness around them through the automatic monitoring system. The road is still long. Jian Shui'er smiled somewhat helplessly. She cupped her burning face with both hands and gently pulled back her legs. That military uniform skirt of hers was pushed up by this movement, revealing the girl's tight, smooth thighs. I'm a little nervous. The girl lowered her head and said, I don't know what to say. This is the first time I've seen a real battlefield, and seen dead people. I'm very nervous too. Su Lu pressed a button, allowing the MX mecha to enter a semi-automatic state. With some difficulty, he turned around and took out that black box. Lowering his head, he opened it and said, "Although I've seen many dead people before, this is also my first time on a battlefield." In the process of taking out the box, his body inevitably rubbed against Jian Shui'er's body. That clear sliver of softness made him feel slightly flustered. If it had been a normal member of the opposite sex, perhaps he would have been able to keep his mind clear, but this was Jian Shui'er. She had been his dream lover since he was young. Moreover, at the concert earlier, he had even seen such a playful and sexy side of her. Jian Shui'er didn't seem to notice these problems. Fanning herself lightly with her small hands, she said in reminiscence, "I've sat in a mecha before. That was a few years ago. When Li Feng was first allowed to operate a mecha, he took me in it once." She glanced at Su Li's well-defined profile, and a trace of a warm smile flashed through her bright, limpid eyes. "But his piloting was very shaky. It wasn't as comfortable as yours. MX's performance is much better." Su Lu was silent for a moment before saying, "And this isn't a river of cars." Chapter 413. The entire journey was silent. The beautiful girl leaned against his arm obediently. The reverberations of the road were clearly transmitted into his mind. The straight road continued forward, but unfortunately, there were no lights, no compound-powered racing cars, only a lonely black mecha. So this was not a sightseeing tour. There was no music playing in the silent cockpit, but the humming of the engine, the soft sound of the hydraulic system, and the low and clear vibration of the metal components were like a song with a strong heavy metal style, lingering in the ears of the young man and woman. From the corner of his eye, Su Lu saw the faint disappointment on Jian Shui'er's beautiful face. He subconsciously lowered his voice and explained, "This is a military mission. You are only a civilian, but you are willing to take the risk to be the bait. You are already very brave." Jian Shui'er adjusted her sitting position and leaned against his shoulder shyly. After a moment of silence, she said softly, "I have a military position. I am studying in the Warship Command faculty of the First Academy." Su Lu was slightly taken aback. He immediately remembered that quiet afternoon 2 years ago when this national girl seemed to have been doing a set of test papers filled with structural diagrams. Perhaps that was the entrance exam for the First Military Academy. The niece of the war god Li Pifu. Having studied in the First Military Academy, it was not surprising that she had a military identity. Since that was the case, it was only natural that she cooperated with the military. However, there was one question that had always puzzled him. Why did the Ministry of Defense let you be the bait? Why did the people of the Empire attack the South like crazy when they saw you appear on this planet? I once wondered if it was because that old man killed the previous emperor of the Empire. They have always wanted revenge but could not find the opportunity, so they vented their anger on you, but even in the Federation, not many people know about your relationship with Feiqing, and this matter does not make sense. Su Li's finger moved the micro button, and a crisp sound rang out in the cockpit of the mecha. Whether it was studying in the university or doing other things, he was always used to silently watching and digesting the information. He rarely asked questions in rapid succession like this. Jian Shui'er frowned slightly and moved her body with difficulty. Her face was full of confusion. "I don't know the reason, but since the Ministry of National Defense came up with this plan, I believe they must have their reasons." She turned her head to look at Su Li's side profile and asked, "I didn't ask you before we left. Actually, I also have a big question. According to the plan of the Ministry of Defense, we should be moving together with the mechanical division. Perhaps our speed will be slower, but if the Empire can really tear through the defense line, this mechanical division and your Group 7 can at least cover you for a period of time. Until the last moment when you can't hold on anymore, then you can send me to Luoqiu. Why did you go against the orders of the Ministry of Defense and take me away alone?" You and I don't know where the military's confidence in this plan comes from, but since those big shots are so confident, I'm sure they'll come for you regardless of whether the Imperial Expeditionary Force can see through this trap or not. Sulu said, in that case, of course I won't go with the battalion. There will always be deaths in war, but it's always better to have fewer deaths. Jian Shue'er's long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and she was silent. After confirming the real reason behind Su Li's decision, the girl felt a faint sense of respect and admiration. For Su Lu, this was a very simple logical problem, but for many people, it was often inconceivable. The Federation fighter that was covering our escape was hit by the Empire. I don't know if the pilot had the chance to jump, but I think he's probably dead. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the enlarged electronic map on the screen. He said softly, I've signed a contract with you on behalf of the Whitewater Company. I owe you a life. Your uncle's daughter. No matter how you look at it, I have the obligation to protect you with my life, but those Federation soldiers who don't know the inside story don't have such an obligation. Understood. Jian Shue'er rubbed her slightly red cheeks, and her eyes lit up slightly. Looking at Su Li's side profile, she smiled sweetly and said, then I'll leave my safety to you. You're welcome. A sincere smile appeared on Su Li's face, and he said, since the Great War God has entrusted this mission to me without worry, he naturally believes that on Planet 5460 tonight, only I can guarantee your safety. I couldn't tell that you were such a confident person normally, murmured Jian Shue'er, gazing at him thoughtfully. Everyone has their own area of expertise. For me, the MX Mecha is my world. As long as I sit in the mecha, I don't know why, but I feel confident to the point of even being a little arrogant, said Su Lu to the girl beside him as he listened to the ultrasonic waves in front of them through the monitoring equipment. This was his first time on a real battlefield, but whether it was the cruel and heroic scenes of the northern battlefields transmitted by the old thing or this long and dangerous journey, none of it could disturb his calm. There was no excitement or panic in his heart, only a natural sense of familiarity with the battlefield. Li Feng also said something similar. It seems that although the two of you are polar opposites in personality, you are very similar in some aspects. Jian Shue'er smiled sweetly, her eyes narrowed in an extremely cute manner. She said, I know you designed the MX, so I'm very curious about what was written on that piece of paper. The paper is some correction parameters. Although there were hints in the system, that engineer who made the adjustment still habitually used paper to tell me these things. Sula thought of that genius girl far away on the capital ring, and said with a smile, the MX Mecha we're sitting in has already had most of its long-range firepower systems removed, and the synchronization speed of the central control system has also been slightly adjusted. This is more suitable for me to perform. Him or her. Her name is Shang Qiu, the first-level technical supervisor of Nutshell, one of the true designers of the MX. Jian Shue'er used her thin index finger to brush away the slightly wet purple strands of hair beside her face. Looking at Sulu with a chuckle, she asked with a hint of innocence, Shang Qiu, what's your relationship with her? A pure relationship between a man and a woman. Sulu also narrowed his eyes as he replied with a smile. Perhaps it was the smell of smoke on this planet, or perhaps it was the dry and hot air in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was the flames of war, death, and escape he had seen along the way, but this Donglen rock suddenly found a trace of his youthful playfulness. He even dared to make such a joke in front of the woman of his dreams. However, this kind of joke was not very interesting. Jian Shue'er rubbed her nose in boredom, but immediately after, because of a sudden collision between the tracks of the mecha and a protrusion on the road, she jumped up. She subconsciously let out a soft cry as she grabbed tightly onto Su Li's arm. Throughout the night, the black mecha ran silently in the night wind. The journey was peaceful, but this planet was already filled with the sorrow of death. The young man and woman in the mecha did not want to recall the Federation mecha that had crashed into the plains, did not want to think about how many people were dying at this time, so they could only force themselves to be calm and chat. However, the sorrow of death was ultimately the starting point of panic, and the woman's panic was the source of the man's pity. Don't be afraid. You really don't have to be afraid, I'm here. He once again forcefully repeated. Suluk felt the delicate skin and soft body of the girl beside him, but there was no desire in his heart. Just like what Uncle had taught him in the past, a normal young man who had given most of his youth to his hands would find it difficult to be lustful whenever he saw a girl he truly liked. The Black MX mecha ran silently towards the northeast direction. When it was about to enter the mountainous area west of Luoqiu spaceport, he suddenly pulled on the control stick, and the mecha instantly entered a static state, looking at the latest battle situation and the detection results of this mountainous area sent by the Federal Central Computer in his left eye. Su Li's thick, knife-like eyebrows raised. His pupils shrank, and he said to Jian Shui'er beside him, "Tie yourself up tighter." Jian Shui'er was slightly stunned. Using the back of her hand to wipe away the sweat on her cheeks, she earnestly followed his instructions and carefully tied the straps around her body. She used a lot of strength to tie the straps around her body. Through the dark military uniform and short skirt, the strap slightly sank into the girl's soft body. In this dangerous and tense moment, the seductive atmosphere in the cockpit became even more intense. Suluk quickly took off his clothes, revealing his well-proportioned and strong naked body. Forcing himself not to look at Jian Shui'er's shocked expression, he shamelessly took out the simulation system from the box and silently started to install it. Although she was sure that the boy beside her wasn't a pervert who would take advantage of the situation, Jian Shui'er couldn't help but exclaim softly when she suddenly saw him naked. She covered her eyes with her hands tightly. Her cheeks, which were originally slightly red, were now as red as an apple in autumn, glowing red and glistening. It was unknown when, but the two pairs of hands that were covering their faces had revealed a sliver of space. Occasionally, a trace of curiosity could be seen, and their eyes were filled with curiosity. Sulu didn't know that the nation's girl beside him was peeping. Only now did he remember the problem with the simulation system. He didn't have time to deal with it, so he was too embarrassed to turn around. "It's done," he said in a low voice. Enhanced mobile platform. Jian Shui'er stared in shock at the system on Su Li's body, covering her mouth in disbelief as she exclaimed. Her voice was very soft. Su Lu was in the midst of his final preparations for the mecha battle, so he didn't hear her clearly. "If you can hold on, don't use the life support system helmet." Sulu narrowed his eyes at the display on the holographic screen and said in a serious tone, "Later on, the tumbling will be very bad. You might vomit, and it might clog up the helmet." Jian Shui'er put down the hand she had been using to cover her mouth and nodded blankly. Only then did the orders from the Federation Command Center ring out in the mecha. Change of plan. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. The charter has just confirmed that the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf Group has broken through the defense line and infiltrated Qinggong Ridge. Command Center orders you to take Miss Jian Shui'er and immediately retreat to the southwest direction. Su Lu was silent for a moment, then abnormally cut off the communication. Under Jian Shui'er's shocked gaze, he took a deep breath, his face slightly pale, and put on the helmet that eye, and the vision of the helmet was the valley behind them. In the darkness of the night, the valley seemed abnormally quiet, but the faint sound of drums could be heard from behind the valley. War drums. It wasn't war drums, it was heavy mecha advancing at high speed. The high frequency of the alloy mecha and the rocky ground seemed to be beating on the hearts of the young man and woman. A black and green Empire mecha suddenly appeared at the mouth of the valley. The next moment, countless black and green Empire mechas surged out of the valley. Chapter 4:14. The Empire's Moon Wolf 3rd generation mecha had a single jet engine and a lightweight outer armor design. Whether it was in terms of quality or firepower, it was not as good as the Federation standard M52 series mecha. The Empire's soldiers were brave and good at fighting. They could endure hardships and had amazing perseverance. In the design of the Moon Wolf mecha, they tried their best to reduce the life support system while leaving most of the power output. Therefore, the Moon Wolf mecha had always been known in the universe for its high speed and light speed. Together with the black and green streamlined outer armor, it looked like an alloy spirit beast that silently moved through the forest. It was precisely because of the Moon Wolf mecha's unique design and innate danger that this most powerful mecha assault force of the Empire's expeditionary force, Maple Forest Alliance, was able to take advantage of the planet's Sea of Fire and the desperate stalemate between the northern and southern battlefronts to follow the 17 mecha clans tore open the distorting cracks in the Iron Curtain at all costs to silently and ruthlessly penetrate deep into the southern hemisphere. They arrived at the valley of Qinggong Ridge and followed the tail of the Federation's black mecha. Perhaps this was a trap set up by the federal military, but the Empire's Moonwolf group looked coldly at the possible ambush ahead. This was because they firmly believed that since their full mecha squad could hide from the eyes of the Federation, they would definitely bring a great surprise to the other party. They were very confident in their own strength. 3 black and green Moon Wolf mechas suddenly shot out like arrows, separated from the main group and rushed towards the black mecha on the outskirts of the valley. A series of rhythmic yet murderous Imperial language rang out from within the Moon Wolf mechas that swarmed out of the valley. Kill that little star. The Maple Forest Alliance's Moon Wolf group, a full mecha configuration, had a total of 115 third-generation mechas of the Empire, and they were all mobilized tonight. These outstanding Imperial pilots quickly operated the mechas on their hands and did not reply to the command on the comm system. This was because when they heard that voice, they knew that if they could not kill the Federation national girl in the mecha in front of them today, the commander would definitely kill them all personally in anger. Luo Fu, the leader of the Night Wolf Mecha Brigade, a colonel of the Empire. He was one of the top 5 ace mecha pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force. Back then, he had the opportunity to enter the Emperor's Special Mecha Battalion, but in the end, he resolutely chose to follow the expeditionary force to a faraway land. It was because he firmly believed that he could only display his abilities on a real battlefield. Through the monitor screen, this Empire elite with a beard as long as wild grass stared coldly at the fleeing black mecha. Listening to the combat power evaluation sent back by the central control computer, he issued the order to attack. The heavy sound of the mecha running echoed through the quiet night sky. Countless mecha gushed out from the mouth of the valley like a stream of greenish-black molten lava, vowing to bury the Federation mecha at the forefront. The central control computer had already given an early warning, but when the other party appeared before them, the Black MX mecha's SSC system and large semi-aperture radar finally confirmed the existence of the mecha horde. This fact made Su feel a tinge of fear towards the camouflage ability of the Empire mecha. At this time, his communication with the command center had already been cut off. The reason he had refused the command center's order to retreat to the southwest was because he knew that once they deviated from the original plan, perhaps the safety of himself and Jian Shuai would be more guaranteed, but the main force lying in ambush ahead would not be able to achieve the results they had planned. Wish me good luck. He felt the slight numbness and itch from every inch of his skin. He took a deep breath, and the warm current in his body instantly spread to every part of his body. Then, through the simulation system that stuck close to his skin, it accurately magnified and transmitted to every part of the MX mecha. His narrowed eyes shone brightly, but his face was rather pale. This was the first time he had seen an Empire citizen up close, the first time he had met an Empire citizen on the battlefield, and this first meeting was a life-and-death battle. Jian Shuai gripped the metal pole beside her tightly, trying her best to get as far away from Su as possible, afraid that she would interfere with his operation. Feeling the slight dizziness brought about by the instant acceleration of the mecha beneath her, she said seriously, "I am a jinx." This was not a joke. In such a tense moment of escape, the young girl was in no mood to joke. She was truly worried that her strange fate would bring misfortune to Sulu. Sulu smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. In the dim cockpit, the sunlight was enough to make one feel dizzy. He said, "I am a jinx." That said, he pushed the control stick once more. The MX mecha's twin engines roared to life, and with a deafening roar, the heavy mecha was like a monster. It crashed through a large tree in front of it and then fled into the distance. The mechanical arms of the Empire's Moon Wolf mecha opened fire. The originally quiet valley that only had the sound of drums was suddenly filled with countless screeching sounds. Mountain rocks shattered, clouds of smoke billowed, and high-speed rotating shrapnel shot towards the black mecha in front of them like raindrops. Love had already received the orders from the Northern Hemisphere Command earlier, so he knew that there might be some kind of danger waiting for his mecha team ahead. However, he was not too worried. With 100 mechas gathered into a torrent, even an entire team of mechanics would not be able to stop him. What made him laugh coldly was that the strange-looking Federation mecha in front of him actually did not change its direction of escape. Could it be that the pilot wanted to use those heavy metal blocks of the Federation to compete with him in terms of speed? In the end, that black mecha was enveloped in a sea of fire and a rain of bullets. He operated the Empire's newest fourth-generation mecha and commanded hundreds of black and green mechas to chase after the enemy. He watched the scene on the screen coldly, waiting for the enemy's mecha to be destroyed and its people to be killed. Stupid bait, stupid trap. However, right after that, his eyes narrowed. This was because he clearly saw that the Black Federation mecha actually charged through the rain of bullets, and there was not a single trace of damage on the mecha's body. How did he do this? Love stared fiercely at the black mecha that was getting faster and faster. From the dead silence of the communication system, he knew that the three mechas at the front and the subordinate mechas at the back were all shocked by the scene in front of them. Precise dodging within a small area. Who is this pilot? Love's expression turned serious, and he controlled the mecha below him to instantly increase its speed. In an instant, it rushed out of the dense formation of mechas, and rushed towards the black mecha at an extremely high speed. The mechas from the Imperial Moonwolf group were obviously shocked by the super dodging ability of the black mecha, but they did not slow down their speed, especially the three black and green mechas at the front. With the help of the auxiliary rocket engine, they suddenly shot forward and caught up to the back of the black MX. Looking at the Federation mecha that was just inches away from them, and thinking about how the pilot in this mecha was actually able to withstand the previous long-range attack without any damage, the three mechas simultaneously gave up on attacking with firepower, and chose to engage in close combat instead. Decades of battlefield experience had already proven that in close combat, the Empire mechas that had the advantage of speed were more agile and had more destructive power, especially tonight when it was 3 against 1. The three black and green Moonwolf mechas stomped heavily on the soft ground, bringing along with them a large amount of black mud. Like three ferocious beasts, they charged forward in parallel, and the alloy blades on their mechanical arms shot out with a whoosh, ruthlessly stabbing towards the back of the black MX. All these actions were completed under the condition of absolute speed. Dodging the long-range attacks of mechas was not too difficult for the current Sulu. In reality, although the hundreds of mechas from the Empire were like a terrifying iron stream pouring out of the valley, his nervousness was still from his first experience on the battlefield, and had nothing to do with cowardice. As the designer, he understood the performance of the Black MX too well, and because of this understanding, he had endless confidence. The Federation's newest generation of dual-engine mecha, appearing on the battlefield for the first time, the Empire's soldiers who were caught off guard would definitely pay a heavy price. Following his quick operation, Lin Bian's Black MX mecha came to an abrupt halt. With a perfect twist of its body, it avoided the incoming alloy blade from its right. Then, with a seemingly casual but extremely precise punch, it struck out viciously into the cockpit of the Imperial mecha directly behind it. The heavy sound of metal hitting metal rang out, and it was abnormally unpleasant to the ears. Countless night birds in the forest, who were already suffering from insomnia due to the cannon fire in the distance, could no longer bear the heavy burden and flew into the sky, battered and exhausted. That ferocious Imperial mecha did not even have the slightest chance of defending itself against this simple close-range attack of the Black MX mecha. The cockpit of the mecha was miserably deformed, sparks flying everywhere as green smoke rose. Amidst the green smoke, the mecha fell powerlessly to its knees on the ground, accompanied by the unpleasant sound of components breaking apart. With one hit, the Black MX, in a posture that defied common sense, used its heavy mechanical legs to push off the ground, and flew backwards. In mid-air, the huge body of the mecha actually forcefully turned around again. The Black MX landed on the ground with both feet, but it did not make any adjustments. It completely ignored the two Empire mechas on the side, and with a roar, it once again fled forward. A simple turn, a close-range attack, and it destroyed a Night Wolf 3rd generation mecha. Love, who was rushing over at high speed, saw this unbelievable scene, and his face turned extremely pale. As an ace pilot, he quickly deduced that the reason for this shocking result was because the Empire mecha could not react at all in front of the Black mecha's high-speed movements. What kind of hand speed was required to execute such a high frequency of mecha movements? Love did not believe that in this universe, there was anyone who could achieve such a hand speed, unless the pilot in the Black mecha was the pride of the Empire, the little princess, or the military god of the Federation. Although in the intelligence of the Empire military, there was a lieutenant colonel of the Federation at the Bermuda Mineral Star who seemed to be able to achieve such a level, he did not believe it at all. He only thought that it was a disguise made by the military to cover up their own incompetence. Love's eyes were like a wolf's, and he stared fiercely at the Black mecha in front of him that was moving faster and faster. It was obvious that whether it was the pride of the Empire or the glory of the Federation, neither would appear on this planet at this time. So, there was only one explanation: the power output and instantaneous explosive speed of this Black Federation mecha had completely suppressed the 3rd generation mecha of the Empire. Could it be the rumored MX? Chapter 4:15. Listen up. Other than killing the little star, I want that mecha. Captain Love's cold voice came out of the communication system of the Empire mecha group. This ace mecha pilot was shocked by the performance of the Federation mecha, but he quickly calmed down. After confirming that the mecha in front of him was the rumored new MX mecha developed by the Federation, he wasn't scared. Instead, he had a strong desire to capture that powerful mecha. He had more than 100 3rd-generation mechas from the Empire. More importantly, although the performance of the mecha was important, the piloting ability of the pilot was still the most important factor. The Northern Hemisphere Command had long warned him that the opponent might be a new MX mecha, but he had not paid much attention to it. It was only until that moment earlier, when he had witnessed the terrifying performance of that Black mecha in its simple and effortless manner, that he had truly thought of capturing the other for the Empire's research. Love's piloting and hand speed had already surpassed level 4. Now, he was standing on the threshold of level 5. He was very confident. The corners of his lips curled up in a cruel sneer, and the speed at which his hands operated suddenly increased. The speed of the new Gen 4 mecha, which he had been suppressing all this time, increased rapidly, turning into a cloud of dust that could devour people as it raced towards the front of the formation. The Black MX mecha in front and the intimidating group of Empire mecha chasing behind didn't use long-range heat source weapons. They were chasing and escaping silently. The sound of the mecha running in the valley and in the wilderness was very clear. The entire night started to tremble. A chilling atmosphere was created. The black and green mecha of the Empire sprinted at high speed, kicking up countless streams of dust in their wake. It was an exceptionally spectacular sight. Meanwhile, that black mecha of the Federation, MX, was sprinting silently half a kilometer away. The current scene was like a group of grassland wolves that had smelled blood and suddenly discovered a lone lion. They were unwilling to give up, and they all wanted to rush forward and bite the lion fiercely once, twice, until the lion was torn into thousands of pieces of bloody flesh. In the midst of this pack of savage grassland wolves, there was a black-green mecha of a slightly different shape that appeared larger and more ferocious. Its speed was clearly much faster than the Imperial mecha beside it. In just a few breaths, it had already broken through from the midsection of the mecha pack to the very front. Using the SSC capture system, Sulu easily identified the unique Empire mecha in the field of vision of the helmet. According to the data provided by the Department of Defense, this should be the fourth-generation mecha that the Empire had just successfully developed 7 years ago. The speed and piloting of the fourth-generation mecha made him squint his eyes. He felt a slight pressure. The person in the fourth-generation mecha was a master. Are you a little dizzy? Being chased by more than 100 Empire mechas, Su Li's simple and precise hand controls brushed past like the wind, not slowing down in the slightest. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and asked a completely unrelated question. The nation's maiden lowered her head weakly, her right hand covering her slightly exposed breasts. She wasn't worried that Sulu would see anything, but she felt a little stuffy in her chest. Previously, the black MX mech suddenly swept backward, twisted its body, and threw a punch. These seemingly simple actions were all carried out at an extremely high speed. The pilot in the cockpit had to bear an extremely large load. Due to the gravitational pull, the load was even greater than that of the space fighter pilot. Su Li's body was like a well-polished machine. Naturally, there were no adverse reactions. However, Jian Shui, who sat beside him, suffered quite a bit. If she hadn't been tied tightly to the cockpit, she would probably have been seriously injured. Find something to do and distract yourself. That should be better. Sulu looked at the Empire mecha moving faster and faster in his field of vision, as well as the cloud of mecha behind it. Although he knew that the opponent would not be able to catch up to him, he still felt some trepidation in his heart. In a slightly hoarse voice, he said, "Look at this red button. Later, when I tell you to press it hard." Jian Shui looked at the red button his right hand was pointing at and guessed that this must be some key control of the MX mecha. She raised her head to look at the man beside her and asked in surprise, "You want me to press it?" "I'm afraid you'll get airsick," explained Sulu seriously. Jian Shui laughed bitterly. She really didn't know what this man's nerves were made of. In such a tense situation, he actually had the mood to joke around. Strength-determined attitude, the black MX mecha had not entered overclocking mode, but it still maintained a high enough speed. Although the cloud of Imperial mecha behind it was continuously closing the distance between them and the black mecha with their light weight and high speed advantage, they were still more than 200 meters away. Follow him. Don't use your jet acceleration for now. I really want to see where this mecha wants to lead us to. Luo Fu stared coldly at the Federation's mecha in front of him. He was alarmed. The Empire had always had the advantage in terms of speed in mecha battles. However, in tonight's pursuit, this advantage was almost gone. The fourth-generation mecha he was operating had already rushed to the front of the group, only about 100 meters away from the black mecha. However, he did not use any long-range attacks for the time being. The mecha horde ran madly, the earth trembling and dust filling the air, but they were still unable to catch up to that damned black mecha in front. In this spectacular yet silent chase in the wilderness, apart from the stunning punch at the very beginning, not a single cannon or bullet was fired. It was just silence. However, who would have thought that the black MX in front of them was under so much pressure, and what kind of danger it was taking? Amidst the silence, the pressure, and the scent of danger, within the 200-meter distance that made Sulu so relaxed and enraged the Imperial Mecha hordes so crazily, the black MX and the cloud of Imperial Mecha behind it ran out of the plains, one in front and one behind. Away from the valley, past the forest, across the black plains, a mountain range could be vaguely seen at the end of the road. It was impossible to see the yellowish color of the mountain range in the darkness of the night, but through the precise positioning of the charter computer in his mind and the electronic map on board, Sulu easily determined that the line between Yellow Mountain Ridge and Lonely Mountain Ridge was just ahead. According to the Ministry of Defense's plan, the Federation's ambush force should be here. His eyes narrowed behind his helmet. With a light flick of his right hand, he reconnected with the Federation's command center. In a low voice, he said, "I have already entered the Yellow Mountain Ridge line. More than 100 third-generation Imperial Mecha are 100 meters behind me. Please accept." In the Southern Hemisphere's Federal Army Command Center Hall, the officers who had become abnormally silent and oppressed due to the MX Mecha's automatic disconnection instantly let out a collective sigh of relief when they heard this long-awaited voice. In reality, through the remnants of the glory of the Charter in the Southern Hemisphere, hundreds of officers in the command center had been watching that spectacular escape on the ground. However, it was very difficult for them to grasp the specific situation around that black mecha. The Federation's third highest commander, General Nelson, frowned slightly and said, "Notify Commander Xiaoqing." Then, he turned around and said calmly, "That Empire's satellite in the sky can be shot down now." The Empire had 3 autonomous orbit-changing satellites invading the Southern Hemisphere's space. Previously, the federal military had already shot down 2 of them, but they had purposely left one behind. The sinister intent behind this was very clear. The Federation Command Center did not want the Empire to chase after the bait only to lose it in the end. At this time, since the Black Mecha had already lured the Empire's ambush team into the encirclement, what was the point of leaving this orbit-changing satellite? General Nelson's expression was relaxed, but his heart was not. The Federation's third defense line was still enduring the crazy and bloody continuous attacks of the Empire's armored forces. Otherwise, he would not have watched the Moonwolf group break into the Southern Hemisphere without doing anything. Although they were luring the enemy in, the number of enemies they lured in seemed to be too many and too strong. Du Xiaoqing, I hope your Iron 7th Division can be as powerful on the battlefield as it was in the drill, General Nelson thought to himself as he looked at the electronic map on the large screen. In a situation where they could not receive follow-up support, an entire division of mechanics trying to ambush and eat the Empire's mecha team. This was not something a normal person could do. However, at this time, a sharp alarm sounded in the command center. A military staff officer reported loudly with an extremely ugly expression, "The Empire's backup assault team has infiltrated to the 17th latitude of the south. They are currently following the path of the first wave of mecha teams and heading towards Luochio spaceport." Everyone in the command center was shocked. They all looked at General Nelson. General Nelson waved his hand to indicate that he understood. He seemed to have a well-thought-out plan, but in his heart, he started to feel uneasy. There were too many variables on the battlefield. The Federation took the initiative to lure the Empire's people to invade the South, but they did not expect that old general of the Empire to actually show a suicidal attitude and launch a direct attack by a large group that had never been seen before in the past 10 years. Under the crazy attacks of the Maple Forest Alliance, the Federation's defense line was in danger. The backup military force that was originally in the tactical simulation had no choice but to be deployed to the front line. At least for the next 2 hours, the command center would not be able to deploy any troops to support the front line. General Nelson's expression was serious. Moonwolf Group and Maple Forest Alliance's 18,000 soldiers. He no longer expected the Iron 7th Division to be able to destroy the enemy. He only hoped that Du Xiaoqing could hold on for a while longer. As long as the front line could catch a breather, the Westwood's 8th Army could move to the south, and victory would definitely belong to the Federation. But could the Iron 7th Division hold on for that long? The Empire's people seemed determined to win. Could that black MX mecha escape to Luocho? Standing between the rocks, Du Shaoqing put down the night vision electronic binoculars in his hands and put on his sunglasses again, even though it was late at night and there was no moon. There was no need for the Federation's command center to send a message. The Iron 7th Division hidden on the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge knew that the person they had been waiting for a long time had finally arrived. Smoke and dust had already risen from the flat field on the left side of the mountain range. In the night, a black MX mecha silently turned into a stream of light and passed through the difficult mountain path below the Iron 7th Division's ambush position. Not far behind him were the 10 mechas closest to the Empire's mecha group. "Get ready," Shimin-Jin said to the electronics officer beside him in a low voice. Du Shaoqing took off his sunglasses and coldly glanced at the Black Federation mecha that passed by at high speed. Then, he glanced at the Empire's mecha group that seemed to be moving behind him and said, "Don't panic." Chapter 4:16. He put on and took off his sunglasses. While he was speaking, 10 Imperial Moon Wolf mechas roared past and chased after the escaping Black MX mecha. Even though the Iron 7 Division ambushing in the mountains suddenly attacked, they could no longer help the Black mecha. There's a 4th-generation mecha. It should be the leader of the Moon Wolf team, Love. He's one of the top 5 ace pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force, Shimin-Jin whispered. Shimin-Jin reminded him in a low voice. He would definitely not question his teacher's command. However, seeing that the Federation's black mech was being chased into danger by the Empire's people, he was a little worried about the pilot and the national girl in the mech. Du Shaoqing's expression was cold and stern as he stared at the Imperial mecha horde in the direction of the Lonely Ridge. He said indifferently, "This is a bag, and we are the rope that ties the bag. What are some small fries that slip through? What we want to eat is this entire mecha brigade behind us." If the Iron 7 Division had attacked just now, the Empire mecha horde that had suddenly slowed down for some reason would definitely know that there was an ambush here. If the mecha horde had decided to turn around and retreat, with the high mobility of the Moon Wolf mechas, the Iron 7 Division would never have been able to catch up. They could only watch as the enemy turned into dust. As for Love, the ace pilot of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, this iron-blooded teacher didn't care at all. "The Ministry of Defense asked us to ensure the safety of Jian Shuier," Shimin-Jin said in a low voice. Du Shaoqing lowered his eyes slightly and said, "The one driving the black MX is Su Lo. He won't die so easily." Shimin-Jin was shocked. He silently retreated to the back and nervously began to prepare for the Imperial Moon Wolf Group's arrival. However, what made him and the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division uneasy was that, for some reason, the Empire mecha horde outside of the ambush not only slowed down but also showed signs of stopping. In the mountains, it was quiet. At this time, the latest battle situation from the Federation command reached Du Shaoqing's ears. He was silent for a moment, then he took a deep breath, raised his head, and looked at the horizon in the distance. Maple Forest Alliance's final trump card, that Reserve Assault Brigade, had also come. Commander Du Shaoqing had a complicated expression in his eyes. The bait plan of the Department of National Defense had lured in an army that was twice their size. However, the command center couldn't send any reinforcements. If Maple Forest Alliance's assault team and mechas were able to tear apart the bag and attack Luocho Airport, they would be able to threaten the side of the military supply depot. The Federal Army would be in absolute danger. General Umbre from the Northern Hemisphere was able to create such a situation out of the impossible. It could be said that he was a godly commander. Decades ago, on the same planet, in the same mountain range, the same Iron 7 Division. Once, under almost exactly the same circumstances, they fought a bloody battle of life and death. That battle made the Iron 7 Division famous in the media. Except for the leaders of the federal military, no one knew that it was the fatal mistake made by the Iron 7 Division at the beginning of this bloody battle that led to the heavy losses of the federal military. It seemed that tonight on the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge, there would be another extremely tragic sniper battle. Du Shaoqing quietly looked at the night sky and thought silently in his heart. Did his father stand in the same position as him? What was he thinking at that time? History seemed to be repeating itself, but the result would definitely not be the same. He coldly unbuttoned the collar of his trench coat and turned to face the officers of the division headquarters. He said calmly, "A brigade of 18,000 people is on its way here. I will only give you 1 hour. You must eat these 100 ugly Imperial mecha." Without air support, without a missile base, an entire division wanted to eat an entire Imperial mecha brigade, an entire mecha brigade with 103rd generation Moon Wolf mecha. Whether it was in the military academies teaching materials or in a real battle, this had never happened before, because this was something that was impossible in the first place. However, after the senior officers of the Iron 7 Division heard their division commander's words, they only nodded firmly in silence. This was the first battle after the Iron 7 Division returned to the front line. They must win. Shimin Jin stood behind her division commander who was looking at the electronic map for the last time. Looking at her division commander's slightly trembling body, she suddenly felt a little sour in her heart. She said in a low voice, "The Imperial Mecha Group is obviously waiting for reinforcements from the brigade at the rear. What if they still refuse to come in after 10 minutes? Should we move forward with Operation Lightning?" "No need." Du Shaoqing raised his head and took the hot towel from the orderly. He wiped his face in the darkness of the valley and said, "The Imperial soldiers are brave and impulsive. If we kill their leader, they will naturally go crazy." Shimin Jin was stunned. She thought that the commander of the Moon Wolf group, Luo Fu, had already chased after Su Luo. How could they kill him if they stayed in the mountains? Let the battlefield communication system scan a radius of 50 meters. I want to talk to that black MX. Du Shaoqing folded the towel and passed it to the orderly. You guys wait for the brigade at the back. Commander Luo Fu left the mecha group and led the 9 most outstanding third-generation mechas under his command to chase after Ling Lan. Before he chased after Ling Lan, he gave an important order to the entire mecha brigade through the communication system. The ambush at the front line of the Yellow Mountain was not the most important part of the war. However, it was the most important part. The headquarters of the Maple Forest Alliance in the Northern Hemisphere had long confirmed the possible locations of the Federation's ambush. They had even accurately calculated the ambush forces that the Federation could mobilize at this time by analyzing the takeoff and landing frequency and the garbage volume of the 2 major airports in the Southern Hemisphere in the recent months. It's just one division. A disdainful sneer appeared on Love's face. He was sure that the Federation commander hiding in the mountains wouldn't dare to expose himself just because of these 10 mechas. Therefore, he bravely passed through the mountain path and chased after the black MX. He said coldly to his subordinates through the communication system. "After I destroy that black MX, I will come back and meet with you guys." Sulu didn't know that the master in the Moonwolf 4th generation mecha behind him was saying that he was going to destroy him with a confident and arrogant tone. At this time, the mountain path was ending and Luoqiu Airport was not far away. The escape with the nation's young lady was coming to an end. He was unusually calm and relaxed. However, that insensible old man told him that other than the mecha brigade at the back, the Empire had actually sent out the assault brigade, their trump card. In the military system of the Empire, a brigade was more powerful than a division of the Federation. The Federation headquarters didn't tell Su Lo this information. In their opinion, Su Lo was lucky enough to bring Jian Shui safely to Luoqiu Airport. Plus, the ambush behind them had nothing to do with him. He didn't know which brigade was ambushing them at the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. However, from the old bastard's prediction, this brigade would definitely be in a terrible situation. At this moment, the military channel of the MX Mecha rang. Su Lo was very familiar with the voice, but he didn't like it. "I'm Du Shaoqing. I'm one of the 10 mechas chasing after you. The one in the 4th generation mecha should be the brigade leader, Luo Fu." "Su Lo, kill him." Su Li's eyes narrowed in shock. Only now did he know that the ambush was actually carried out by the Iron 7th Division. In the channel, that iron-faced commander's voice was as cold and direct as it was a few months ago. It sounded extremely rude, but he knew this person very well. This time, the other didn't use his military position to order him around. This was already very different. He only needed half a second to think. He narrowed his eyes, opened the universal channel, and said a single word. "Okay." In one of Master Schiller's plays, there was a mentally handicapped person who loved to run. That mentally handicapped person ran all over Planet S1, ran all over the Capital Ring, and in the end, even ran all the way to the West Woods. He even ran on a spaceship. This mentally handicapped person became a celebrity in human society. Countless people followed him, running non-stop, not asking for a reason, just running non-stop. However, one day, this mentally handicapped person suddenly didn't want to run anymore. He felt bored, so he stopped, and then turned around, saying that he wanted to go home, leaving his followers with endless emptiness and the disappointment of the media. Running was a habit. Once started, it was hard to stop. If one really stopped after running for a long time, it would always be hard to get used to. The mechas chased each other for an unknown amount of time tonight. Suddenly, the Black Federation mecha at the end of the mountain road ahead stopped abruptly, then slowly turned around. Out of the 10 Empire mechas, 9 of them stopped for a moment. The pilots in the cockpits couldn't believe what they were seeing. Because of the intense shock in their hearts, their operations were affected. Only that 4th generation Moon Wolf mech, which had an exceptionally strong contrast between black and green, did not slow down in the slightest. Instead, the rocket jets at the back of the mech instantly shot out, the powerful propulsion causing its speed to become incomparably fast. Just this small detail was enough to prove that Captain Love of the 4th generation mecha had the most determined mind and the most ruthless eyes of an ace mecha pilot. With a straight arrow of smoke, the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha charged towards the Black MX. At such a high speed, this mecha even used the mechanical arm on its right hand to draw a symbol in the air. Su Lo was a professional soldier, so he didn't have much understanding of the universal machine language. Thinking back to the time when he was in Yue University, when he had a mecha battle with that officer of the First Academy, it had caused quite a commotion. However, he could roughly understand what the Empire mecha pilot was trying to say. Thus, wearing the simulation system, he did not hesitate to give the mecha a middle finger. At the same time, in the dim cockpit, a slender index finger pressed hard on the red button. Amidst the hissing sounds of compressed air, a few heavy components of the Black MX body shot out one after another, smashing onto the ground. Surprisingly, the thick armor on the right shoulder did not fall off, and the middle finger of the right alloy hand stood straight up, facing the enemy. This MX was a special mecha that Shang Qiu had specially modified for Su Lo. Originally, it did not have the fire control system that most normal pilots would need, so the components fell off very quickly. In just 0.1 seconds, the Black Mecha had officially entered overclocking mode. At this time, the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha had already arrived in front of the Black MX with an unstoppable momentum. The next moment, Love's pupils suddenly shrank in the cockpit. This was because the Federation mecha in the vision of his helmet had disappeared. A strong sense of danger surged into his heart. Relying on his rich battle experience, Love roared and forced himself to turn around in an instant. The black and green mech forcefully turned around at high speed, its thick mechanical arm blocking the front, just in time to block the silent punch from the night sky. With a low hum, the Black MX mecha's powerful twin engines were fully displayed in this one hit. The 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha was forced to retreat. Then, the Black mecha forcefully increased its speed again. It turned into a flash of lightning and once again attacked the chest of the Black Moon Wolf mecha. The speed of the Black MX was too fast, and the frequency of its movements was too fast. It was like countless rocks falling from a mountaintop, striking the surface of the Moon Wolf mech's armor with crisp and powerful sounds, producing a continuous series of dull, paw sounds. Love's face was pale. He pushed his control to the limit. In this life and death situation, he had already performed beyond his usual standards. However, he still could not keep up with the Black mecha's movements. The Black MX dodged at high speed on the mountain path. There were no afterimages. It was just like a flash of lightning or a ghost. To Love, it was more like a sharp and powerful bullet that he was terrified of. It kept shooting towards his face. Bullets could not turn, but this Black MX was able to move in a straight line at high speed. It was like a high-speed bullet that was bouncing back and forth in an alloy plate. What kind of hand speed was required to perform such a terrifying control? Or rather, what kind of freakish hand was required to perform such a control? Or rather, it was impossible to perform such a control by hand. When the 9th third-generation Moon Wolf mechas of the Empire rushed to the battlefield, they were greeted by this shocking sight. They could only watch with their own eyes as the Moon Wolf mecha controlled by Commander Love was continuously bombarded by the Black MX of the Federation, unable to retaliate at all. Under such immense shock, they were unable to react at all. According to the memories of a pilot who had survived the incident, he had never seen such mecha piloting in his entire life. He could not understand how a mecha weighing dozens of tons could perform such unimaginable maneuvers. The ground of the mountain path had clearly festered, but that Federation pilot had not been able to slow down the Black mecha's movements in the slightest. What had left the deepest impression on the surviving pilot was the close combat style of the Black MX mech. The strong mecha fighters all had their own close combat style. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng was bold and violent, Bai Yulan was sinister and silent, and Zhou Yu was serious and serious. As for the Black MX controlled by Su Lu, in this first battle, the style it displayed was simple and direct. It could even be described as plain. Su Lu understood the structure of mecha very well. Although the mecha designs of the Empire and the Federation were very different, the two sides of the universe had the same thinking habits. There was not much difference in terms of ideology. Therefore, every time he attacked, he would often attack the most inconspicuous part of the Black and Green Moon Wolf mecha. Only the mechanics would understand the key points of the mecha. It was extremely precise and precise. Simple, direct, plain, precise, and precise. When these 5 adjectives were stacked together, the style was mixed into a pile. When it was combined to the extreme, it became a silent ruthlessness, a silent suppression. In the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha, Captain Love clearly felt the terror of this style. He was the ace pilot of the Empire. However, when he came here arrogantly, he was in despair. Although the Moon Wolf mecha was able to avoid 3 lightning strikes from the Black MX's tooth-edge alloy blade, his heart was getting colder and colder. He was getting more and more desperate. That dark and helpless danger was about to take over his mind. That a crisp sound rang out. The black light condensed into a single point. That was the black MX that had stopped moving. The black mecha pulled out a spinning alloy blade from the edge of the cockpit of the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha. For any mecha, the front of the cockpit was definitely the strongest defense. However, the black mecha continuously threw 7 or 8 heavy punches at that spot, followed by a final stab. No matter how strong the armor of the Empire mecha was, it was finally broken. Sparks shot out from the edge of the cockpit. However, the black mecha still stubbornly did not fall. After entering overclocking mode, the black MX's right shoulder fire control system, which was the only part that did not fall off, flipped out from under the armor. It aimed at the sparking cockpit of the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha and blasted it. With a boom, the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha fell to the ground. Immediately after, the black MX lifted its heavy mechanical leg without hesitation and stomped on the already deformed cockpit of the Empire mecha. Green smoke billowed and blood flowed out. 4 seconds. From the moment the two mecha came into contact to the end of everything, only 4 seconds had passed. The other 9 Empire mecha did not have the time to react, nor did they have the ability to participate in this terrifying mecha battle. They stared at the black mecha that was turning around, and at the burning Moon Wolf mecha beneath its feet. They stood frozen on the mountain path in shock. In the dim cockpit of the black MX mecha, Jian Shue'er's eyes were tightly shut, her long eyelashes fluttering non-stop. Due to the high frequency of the mecha battle, the young girl's face was pale from the concussion. Her brain was in a daze, and she could not speak at all. However, she vaguely knew that she was still alive, while the Empire mecha was dead. Su Le took off his helmet. Large amounts of sweat flowed down his forehead, following the smooth simulation system and flowing down to the water level of the cockpit. His face was pale, and a trace of complex emotions appeared in his slightly narrowed eyes. He did not immediately attack the 9th third-generation Empire mecha. This was because he was currently very weak, very tired, and even very hungry. Although the previous mecha battle had only taken 4 seconds, who knew how many controls he had done in those 4 seconds? Through the simulation system, the joystick, and the touch screen, he had used 3 complex methods to control the black MX. That was how he had gained the absolute advantage in front of the Empire Ace mecha pilot. However, after the battle, he had used up too much of his stamina and energy. Opening the universal channel, Su Le wiped the sweat from his lips and beard. Panting, he spoke to the Iron 7th Division and Du Shaoqing who were ambushing him in the mountains. Already killed. Chapter 417. Kill him. I've already killed him. Du Shaoqing held the mini-communicator and sent out orders to the black MX mecha which had already escaped from the valley. In less than half a minute, the black MX mecha in the distance gave a clear and forceful response. These 2 simple sentences made the expressions of everyone in the Iron 7th Division on the peak change drastically. The officers knew very well that the person in the Moon Wolf 4th Gen mecha was the Empire's ace pilot, Love. Facing such a strong opponent, could it be that the black MX only used such a short amount of time to end the mecha battle and kill the opponent? At this moment, the conversation between the commander and Su Le still seemed to be echoing in the quiet peak, reverberating in their ears. Everything happened so quickly that the officers couldn't react in time. They looked at the commander in the command center in shock as he turned on the high-powered battlefield communicator. Shiman Jin had been carefully monitoring the Empire's mecha group outside the valley. The relevant tactical simulations had already been completed. All the combat units under the command of the division knew the tactical details of this ambush by heart. He shouldn't be so nervous, but this was the first time the Iron 7th Division was on the battlefield. A real battlefield was very different from a mock battle. Furthermore, the backup assault team of the Imperial Expeditionary Force had more than 10,000 people, and they were already on their way. There wasn't much time left for the Iron 7 Masters. Fortunately, the Black MX was able to kill the Imperial mecha captain cleanly behind the mountain with a few simple words. Compared to his colleagues, he woke up faster. This was because he had seen how terrifying the MX under the control of Su Lo was when he was at the bottom of the Blue Pond Valley on planet S1. Looking at the back of her teacher, Shimin Jin's heart surged with a trace of complicated emotions. This kind of emotion was not because Su Lo had killed the Empire's ace mech pilot in seconds, but because of the extremely concise conversation between her teacher and Su Lo. From the commander to the most common soldier in the Iron 7th Division, no one liked the young lieutenant colonel who had joined the army halfway. Su Lo believed that he didn't have a good impression of the Iron 7th Division either. However, Du Xiaoqing did not even give it a second thought before handing over the crucial task of luring the Empire's mecha fleet into the valley to the other party. Su Lo didn't even think about it before agreeing to it and completing it in an extremely efficient manner. What did this mean? This represented absolute trust and confidence. Division Commander Xiaoqing had absolute confidence in Su Li's abilities, and Su Lo also had absolute confidence in Du Xiaoqing's military judgment. Furthermore, he believed that a model soldier like Du Xiaoqing would never harm his comrades on the battlefield. That was why he did not hesitate to turn around and take a huge risk to kill a person for the Iron 7th Division. This kind of trust did not happen between brothers who had gone through life and death together. It happened between two people who were natural opposites and had a deep hatred for each other. The meaning behind this was very moving. Du Xiaoqing did not care about what his subordinates were thinking. He waved his hand with a cold expression on his face and signaled the troops to start preparing. Then he connected to the battlefield high-power communication system and said into the sound receiver, "Love is dead." He spoke the Empire language, a very standard Empire language. Since a long time ago, the entire Iron 7th Division had started training in this area because they knew that one day they would have to go to the front line and deal with the Empire people face to face. In the division headquarters, Du Xiaoqing's voice was calm and deep. However, in the next moment, a loud voice suddenly rang out from the countless mountains and valleys along the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. Love is dead. The Federation's battlefield communication system transmitted this sentence through the high-power loudspeaker. The loud voice resounded through the mountains and shattered the quiet night sky of the southern hemisphere. It was clearly transmitted to the Imperial Moonwolf group that was on alert and waiting for reinforcements at the edge of the valley. Almost at the same time, in the dark valley, following Du Xiaoqing's cold voice, countless bright light beams lit up. In the crevices of the mountains and in the rock formations, the high-brightness searchlights that the Iron 7th Division had set up in advance instantly lit up the entire sky and the valley. The dark yellow rock surface of the mountain finally showed its true color under the bright light. The Imperial Moonwolf group outside the valley was illuminated by the bright light and couldn't hide. On the gentle slope of the valley, the Federal military's mountain grenade launchers also took off their disguise. Countless composite armored vehicles and armed infantry of the Federation revealed themselves and aimed at the hundreds of third-generation Moonwolf mechas from the Empire. The airstrike force of the Empire and the Federation was on the third line of defense in the southern hemisphere right now. They were chasing each other at high speed like streams of light, providing support for the extremely cruel offensive and defensive bloody battle on the ground. There was no way for them to provide support. Therefore, the Iron 7th Division actually gave up on the usual flares and chose to use searchlights to illuminate the sky and the ground at the same time. The iron-blooded commander of the Iron 7th Division gave up on the ambush at the last moment of the battle without hesitation. He chose to annihilate the enemy head-on. It was just a matter of whether the Empire people dared to come. Because of the searchlights, this valley became a bright concert stage, just like the concert called Victory a few hours ago. There was no countdown, no yelling orders, only silence. The bright searchlights lit up countless mountain peaks. Countless armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation appeared in the valley. Then, countless cannons roared and fired at the Empire mechas outside the valley. The lights were very bright, but it wasn't unbearable. The appearance of the Federation's ambush in the valley ahead was already within the Empire's tactical calculations. Therefore, even though the Empire soldiers saw the dense crowd of armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation charging over, they were still able to maintain their calm. Even under the whistling and sharp barrage of cannons, they were confident that their high-speed mechas would be able to avoid most of the damage. What really made the Empire's soldiers shiver was the voice at the beginning, that sentence. They didn't know that the person who spoke was the commander of the Federation's Iron 7th Division, Du Xiaoqing, but because of the content of that sentence, they felt extremely cold. Is the commander dead? Colonel Love's domineering and rough voice didn't ring in the communication system of the Empire mechas. All the Empire officers, including the 3 squadron leaders, felt an extremely dangerous omen in their hearts. They knew that the Federation wasn't lying. At this time, the first wave of cannons from the Iron 7th Division had already arrived. Scatter and evade. The first squadron leader of the Moon Wolf group ordered in a deep voice. 104 Green-Black Moon Wolf mecha, with a whoosh, followed the forest outside the valley and began to perform high-speed evasive maneuvers. Even though they were shocked to the point of disbelief by the extremely terrifying news, these Empire pilots still calmly and precisely completed each of their maneuvers, dispersing with extreme speed towards the wild forest behind the valley. The movements of the Empire's mechas were so clean and precise. It felt like a balloon filled with many glass beads that suddenly exploded. All the glass beads inside the balloon sputtered everywhere. Every mecha maintained an extremely suitable distance from each other. Boom! 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 The dense cannons of the Iron 7th Division landed horribly on the ground. The bombardment caused the entire ground to tremble. Tons of soil were blown up and scattered. Trees were burned and fell. Giant rocks were shattered. However, the Empire's mechas used their high mobility to avoid most of the direct damage. The mechas in black and green quickly left the dense cannons and hid behind the mountains and giant trees. Using these natural shelters, they blocked the first wave of cannons from the Federation. Right now, there were 2 paths in front of the Moon Wolf group. The first was to give up on the 10 mechas that had already rushed past the valley, including their commander, Love. They would immediately retreat and leave the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge area. As long as the mechas increased their speed, the Federation's ambush team wouldn't be able to catch up with them. The second path was to attack the valley and weaken the Federal Army's combat power at all costs. They would avenge their commander and delay the Federal Army for the Empire's assault team. In fact, an entire mecha team did have this ability. Although the valley area was convenient for ambushes, once the mechas broke in, their high mobility would be the nightmare of the Federation's mechanical army. Commander, 17 mechas are slightly damaged. Only 2 mechas have lost their mobility. The smoke and flames that filled the sky outside the valley, as well as the violent explosions there, had become much quieter by the time they reached the peak. However, Shimin Jin's voice was still very loud. Got it. Du Xiaoqing had a cold expression on his face. He silently looked at the trembling ground under his feet. He looked at his subordinates who were bravely charging in the mountains. He was very satisfied with this terrible result. Iron 7th Division's first round of cannon fire didn't cause any real damage to the Empire's high-speed mechas. On the contrary, it gave the Empire's soldiers a strong sense of confidence. According to the calculation of firepower, there was indeed only 1 Federation mechanic in the mountains. How could a division be able to stop their iron stream charge? Between the 2 completely opposite paths, the Moon Wolf group chose the latter without hesitation. The shock and pain caused by Commander Love's death turned into courage and bravery. 100 black and green mechas instantly broke through the thick fog of gunpowder and charged into the valley. The iron stream charge rushed in, stirring up a frenzied cloud of dust. The collective charge of the heavy mechas looked so unstoppable that even the mountains under the searchlight started to tremble. High mobility, powerful firepower, and a mecha design that was extremely suitable for mountainous warfare turned the Moonwolf group into a ferocious mountain-splitting axe. They viciously chopped down on the encirclement of Iron 7th Division. Countless dull sounds of metal clashing rang out in the valley. The sound of bullets and cannons shook the sky. The Empire's mechas were like countless black shadows, moving freely in the front line of Iron 7th Division. They were ferocious and incomparably sharp. In an instant, they continuously charged forward a distance of 700 meters. In front of this kind of iron stream charge, the slow tanks and armed infantry couldn't react at all. In the process of charging forward, the Moonwolf group's advantage in speed was displayed to the extreme. Find their M52s closely monitored the activation frequency of the anti-mecha mine array, OO. The company leader's Moonwolf mecha fiercely shot out a rain of bullets, turning the Federation soldiers 100 meters away into pools of blood. At this time, there were countless flames of anger in his heart. He only wanted to help the main team behind him delay this Federation division, but he didn't let down his guard. The headquarters of Iron 7th Division, Shimin Jin's expression was solemn as she looked at the rising casualty count. Finally, she couldn't help but look at her division commander. Du Shaoqing wore sunglasses and sat silently on a large rock. He looked at the tragic battlefield below. Looking at the fierce yet cautious Empire's mechas breaking into the ambush circle, he knew that the enemy's backup commander hadn't truly gone crazy. He opened his mouth and said, "Wait a little longer." Shimin Jin's heart tightened. It should be known that every second they waited, more of their comrades would die. What my division commander needs now is time. He must succeed in one strike. We can't let this pile of mechas drag on until the 10,000 people behind us arrive. Du Shaoqing slowly closed his eyes under the sunglasses and said, "Only victory and defeat, not life and death. This is war." Chapter 4:18. The tongues of flame that shot out from the front of the mechanical arms of the black and green mecha were actually high-speed and sharp bullets. They hit the cliffs of the valley and splashed out countless fragments. 3 Federation soldiers hiding behind the hidden fortifications were hit and fell to the ground. In just a moment, the 3 fresh corpses were turned into cloth bags filled with bright red material. Tongues of flame sprayed out everywhere. Countless amounts of soil were flipped up, and the tanks were set ablaze. Amidst the continuous and terrifying sounds of machine guns, the sturdy base at the bottom of the mountain was riddled with holes. Blood and broken limbs flew everywhere. The most terrifying thing was the mobility of these black and green mecha. Under the crazy barrage of the Federation's mountain howitzers, most of them still managed to survive. The Empire's mecha group was like a pack of tireless grassland wolves. They cruelly and crazily rushed into the ambush area of the Iron 7th Division. They bared their sharp fangs and bit viciously at the Federation's base. Then, using the fastest speed possible, they changed their formation and broke into smaller groups. Taking advantage of the occasional collapse of the Iron 7th Division's front line, they split into a dozen small groups and spread out in all directions. Following the natural water line and gentle slope of the valley, they launched a second charge. Screeching sounds rang out. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division hidden in the mountains had been silently and resolutely counterattacking. The bullets fired by the Federation's 21-26 sniper rifle hit several Empire mecha. However, they only left light gray marks and dense dents on the sturdy alloy armor. One of the Imperial mechs raised its right arm and fired its main cannon at a 32-degree angle. Along with a heavy roar, the powerful cannon fired didn't hit the target. Instead, it hit the quick-solidifying concrete structure of the fortification. The explosion caused the quick-solidifying concrete to shatter and splatter in all directions. Of the 5 Federation soldiers hiding in the fortification, 4 were instantly crushed to death by the rocks. Blood flowed out along the remnants of the explosion and the cracks between the rocks. There was still one soldier who did not die immediately. The helmet he was wearing blocked most of the high-speed rocks, but his goggles had been shattered. He screamed in pain, and his face was covered in blood and exposed muscles. In the last moment of his life, he raised the MP5 submachine gun in his hand and fired non-stop at the foot of the mountain. Both of his eyes were blinded, and blood was flowing down his face. The submachine gun in his hands was shooting out flames, but it was aimless. He couldn't hit the black-green mecha in front of him at all. The next moment, he missed a step and fell down the cliff. The Empire's black and green mecha coldly watched this scene. Without any hesitation, it continued to charge forward along the gentle slope. But from the side, a ponytail-heavy rocket fired over with a whoosh, accurately hitting the side of the mecha's abdomen. After the loud explosion, there was a dull sound of metal parts rubbing against each other. The outer armor of the Empire's mecha's engine was severely damaged, and its power output was occasionally affected. Its originally high-speed movement mode was suddenly slowed down. It was only delayed for a moment, and 7 or 8 precision-guided rockets from the Federation flew at high speed from all directions at the same time, hitting the heavy and huge body of the mecha. The sound of the explosion and the blinding light kept flashing. This Empire's mecha was burned black, and its parts were severely damaged. Its balance was completely disabled, and it fell down the cliff in a tragic manner, turning into a pile of alloy garbage. Just like that Federation soldier just now, such a tragic scene of a battlefield appeared below the Yellow Mountain Ridge, below the Lonely Mountain Ridge. The wolf pack of the Empire's mecha brigade spread out at high speed. Wherever they charged, battle would break out there. Tragic scenes could be found everywhere. Every Federation soldier who had died in the mountains actually had a life story that belonged to them. However, at this moment, there was no extra time to reflect on it, to sigh with emotion, because this was a battlefield. This was war. Today's ambush was the first time the Iron 7 Division had been on the battlefield. Facing the ruthless and crazed mecha of the Empire, feeling the explosions of fireworks in the valley, hearing the familiar cries of pain around them, and seeing the shattered and burning corpses of their comrades lying between the rocks and cliffs, they finally understood that the battlefield was not a drill. Their dead comrades wouldn't be able to stand in front of them again just by removing the death indicator on their bodies like before. Under the high-speed charge of the Empire's mecha, the first line of the Iron 7th Division's ambush was showing signs of chaos and even being defeated. No matter how strict Du Shaoqing's management was, and how calm his command was, after all, an army was made up of people, not real machines. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division were as firm and unyielding as their commander, Shaoqing. However, their fingers would get tired when they used the armor-piercing heavy machine guns. They would tremble, they would cry, they would laugh, and they would feel pain. And now, they were even a little confused and scared. But they were the Iron 7th Division after all. The Iron 7th Division, the trump card of the Federation, had never lost in military exercises for 10 years. After 10 years, they had returned to the West Woods, to the front line, to the 5460. How could they be defeated by fear? With their pride, their perseverance, how could they allow themselves to be defeated? The soldiers of the 3rd Regiment of the Iron 7th Division, who were in charge of the first line of ambush, finally exploded at the most critical moment. They stood up from the cliff, wiped the ash off their faces, endured the pain from their wounds, and ignored the high-speed Empire's mecha charging towards them. Using the corpses of their comrades who had died under the Empire's alloy blades as motivation, they roared and launched their counterattack. The bravery of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division wasn't enough to change the situation on the battlefield. An Imperial mech squad originally had the ability to fight head-on with an entire Federation division. Plus, this was an ambush battle in the middle of a mountain range. The high mobility of the Imperial mech squad gave them a natural advantage. In fact, if the Federation's Ministry of Defense didn't misjudge the type of Imperial armies that were attacking them, then the Iron 7th Division's choice of location for the ambush would definitely have a deeper meaning. The fierce battle quickly spread out from the entrance of the mountain valley in all directions. In order to avoid the coverage of the Federation's mountain grenades, the Empire's mecha squad had to spread out in all directions. They also had the ability to complete this kind of spread-out battle. Looking at the red smoke under Silent Hill in the distance, Shimin Jean put down her electronic binoculars. Her mood was very bad. One of the Empire's mecha squad had already rushed past the anti-mecha mine formation. Although the turbulent explosion had a good effect, it didn't cause any fatal damage to the enemy. Plus, with the high speed of the Empire's mecha, the Federation's rocket launchers didn't have much of an effect. If the Ministry of Defense could distribute ACWs, the 3rd Division wouldn't have to fight so hard. The Federal Army's normal anti-material sniper rifle couldn't cause fatal damage to the 3rd-generation mecha of the Empire, unless the ACWs were paired with high-rotation speed tungsten alloy armor-piercing bullets. However, that legendary big gun was too expensive to make. Even if the Ministry of Defense's General Assembly base wanted to, the Budget Committee of Parliament Hill couldn't approve it. The division headquarters was dead silent. The officers were working hard in front of their workstations. No one dared to look at the division commander sitting at the back. Faced with the ferocious attacks of the Empire's mecha fleet, the Iron 7 Division had only sent out 1 regiment so far. Even the amount of ammunition they had was limited to 1/3 of the original limit. No one knew what the division commander was thinking. Du Shaoqing sat silently in his chair. His hands, which were wearing lambskin gloves, rested on his knees. No one seemed to have expected that the youngest Major General of the Federation, who was highly valued by the President and the military, was also stepping onto a real battlefield for the first time. In the eyes of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division, Division Commander Shaoqing was like a god. There was no way he would make a mistake. So, at this moment, no one noticed that the veins at the corner of his eyes were popping under his sunglasses. The federal military's plan on this planet was to cast a net. They would use Jian Shuai as bait to lure the Empire's people to the south. Then, they would use the Westwoods army on the dividing line between the north and the south to pull the net north. They would trap the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Alliance. Then, they would use the Iron 7th Division to tie the last rope. But old General Ambly of the Empire obviously didn't see through this was a trap. He didn't know why, but from the very beginning, he launched a fierce attack on the dividing line between the north and south, tearing the Federation's net into pieces. In this way, the rope that was the Iron 7th Division had to face the surprise attack of the Imperial Mech Squad and the Assault Brigade. It should be known that the combat power of a mech squad was already terrifying. Not to mention, the size of the Imperial Assault Group was even bigger than a division of the Federation. The rope became the bottom of the net without any cloth covering it. The mission of the Iron 7th Division was extremely difficult. Westgate, more than half of the Empire's mechas on this planet are under our watch. It's already very good that the Iron 3rd Division is doing so well. Du Shaoqing calmed down. Because of the current situation, he had to take down all 100 Empire's mechas in the shortest amount of time and at the lowest cost. No, now there were only 86 mechas left. Only then would the Iron 7th Division be able to deal with the Imperial Assault Group that was about to arrive. That was why the Iron 7th Division had been suppressing most of their firepower since the start of the battle. They had to lure the crazy Empire's mechas into the depths of the battlefield and make it impossible for them to escape. However, the Iron 7th Division had to pay the smallest price, while the soldiers on the front line had to pay the heaviest price. Waveband appeared. Waveband appeared. The electronic alarm of the Empire's mechas rang out in the internal communication network of the Empire's mechas. Boom! 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 The Federation's anti-mecha lightning arrays buried in the mountains all exploded. The earth trembled as a result, and the valleys turned yellow as a result. Magnificent smoke and streams of light continued to linger in the night sky that seemed to be burning red. The Empire's mechas that had already scattered into formation scattered once again. Like countless balloons that had been blown apart, they became even smaller balloons. The leader of the first company of the Moon Wolf Group looked at the magnificent explosion behind him through his vision. After confirming that there were still around 80 mechas that were fine, his confidence increased again. However, he was still a little worried about his leader's life. Leader Love was a hero of his generation. He wanted to capture the Federation's MX mecha alive, but he was killed by the MX mecha. Could it be that the Federation's new MX mecha were really that terrifying? Fortunately, the Federation didn't have the ability to mass-produce them yet. Just as the company leader was thinking this, his pupils suddenly shrank. Oh. Chapter 419. This was a battlefield, this was a war, this was not a stage play, this was not a deliberate climax, this was a sudden effect deliberately planned by Du Shaoqing. It was like a flash of lightning changing the shape of the sky, like a fire igniting the screen of a cinema, suddenly appearing, shocking the mecha of the Empire. They couldn't help but tremble, they suddenly felt the shadow of death. They didn't want to die, but they suddenly felt the shadow of death. The black and green mechas scattered across the wide mountainous area, the Empire's mechas that once showed their powerful mobility in the first wave of attack, showing off their ferocity and ruthlessness, at the foot of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, at the foot of the Lonely Mountain Ridge, under the huge yellow rock, under the burning debris, all of them froze on the spot like their platoon leader, because they all realized that there was one or more black mechas in front of them. The Black Federation mecha didn't look very strong, but as the people of the Empire always said, judging a book by its cover was the road to death. A slender body didn't mean that it was delicate, not to mention that these mechas looked so familiar, just like 2 hours ago, they kept running under their eyes, but they could never catch up with that mecha. MX. Federation's MX, a single mecha was a terrifying killing machine, and a group of 100 mechas was an alloy flow that was hard to resist. Even an entire mechanic would find it hard to resist their high-speed, agile, and ruthless battle style. What was this terrifying group of Empire's mechas afraid of? Cannon formation. There wouldn't be any in the mountainous area. High-speed missile launch. The missile bases of both sides were firing with all their might, but those missiles that were rampaging in the night sky were miserably flying back and forth in the air above the dividing line between the north and the south. Fighter jets attacking the ground. The Federation's fighter jets were fighting with the Empire's Night Wolf fleet at Zaiqiu Airport, and they also had to closely guard the sky above Luoqiu Airport. At the front line between the Yellow Mountain Ridge and the Lonely Mountain Ridge, at this moment in the middle of the night, what was the Imperial mech squad afraid of? In fact, the platoon leader knew very well that the enemy of the military mechas could only be the military mechas. At this moment, unless the Federation sent out a group of M-Series Federation mecha to deal with him, the Empire's mecha squad would obtain the final victory. But how could a mere Federation mecha operator have so many M52 mechas? It should be known that in that society that was all about bullshit elections, there was no such thing as a full mecha operator. The platoon leader's thoughts stopped there, the Federation mecha operators in the valley, but these black mechas that appeared between the mountains and the giant rocks. What were they? A black light flashed, and 3 black mechas from the Federation mechas flew across the sky and rushed downwards. The first of the Federation of mechas, the Empire, and the first of the Federation of the Federation, and then collapsed under the 3 continuous 3 attacks amidst the deafening boom. The Empire's dark green mecha tumbled down the mountain like a piece of metal before exploding abruptly. Everyone was stunned. This was mainly referring to the pilots of the Empire's Moon Wolf mecha team. They had already confirmed the death of Captain Love. However, right after that, they stared in shock at the captain of the first squadron. Like a rubber ball, he was kicked down the hill by the Federation's mecha and turned into a ball of fire with a chilling aura. MX. Be careful. It's the Federation's MX. In the internal communication system of the Empire mecha squad, sharp, angry, and desperate screams rang out. They were not afraid of ambushes, nor were they afraid of the Federation's Iron 7th Division's so-called tactics, but suddenly faced with the new Federation mecha that completely overwhelmed them. Finally, they felt fear. Not all of the Empire mecha were like their poor captain, facing 3 black Federation mecha MX alone. The more common situation was when a black mecha stood up silently in front of 3 or 4 Empire Moonwolf MX 3rd generation mechas. The Federation mecha tore off its yellow cloth disguise, and stood up silently and coldly. It suddenly appeared, but it was as if it was a stream from the north of this planet. From the peak of the mountain, between the rocks, and below the valley, it charged at high speed, and viciously pierced into the Empire mecha squad that had already scattered into countless small teams. More than 20 black mecha shadows suddenly burst out, and spread out in all directions. The heavy mecha's rapid footsteps made the rocks in the valley fly up into the air. The sound of cannons, alloy knives cutting through the air, and explosions rang out one after another in this battle zone that was dozens of kilometers in radius. Flames, gunfire, and main cannons continuously lit up the entire sky, and countless remote corners. The most common scene on the battlefield was a black Federation mecha MX charging into the small team formation of 3 Empire Moonwolf MX 3rd generation mechas as if it didn't care about its own life. In just a short few seconds, more than 10 mechas were destroyed, and flames rose into the sky. All of the Moonwolf group's pilots could see that these Federation mecha MX that had been in hiding for a long time were obviously not as strong as the black MX from before. However, no matter if it was instantaneous speed, fire control system, or everything else, the black MX that the Federation had hidden in ambush was ahead of their own mecha in every aspect, and it was hard for their own mecha to retaliate. Even if it was 1 against 3, or even 1 against 4, it was still the same. Iron 7th Division's long-awaited lightning-fast attack began with the lightning strikes of the 20 black MX mechas. Loud explosions rang out in the vast valley from time to time, and clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. No one knew how many Empire mechas had tragically exploded in this short period of time. The low humming sound of engines rang out again under the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. Countless composite armors and strong firepower troops swarmed out of the seemingly empty fortifications and valley like a swarm of ants. Like flowing water, they spread out and rushed in all directions along the valley's terrain. All of the Iron 7th Division's regiments and all of the long-range firepower troops poured out in torrents, and their momentum shook the heavens. The strongest firepower unit of the Iron 7 Division, which had been in hiding until now, didn't participate in the mecha battle at the center of the battlefield. The soldiers drove the war chariots, leading the concentrated firepower base, and drove out of the valley with stern expressions. The mecha battle at the center of the battlefield was already in full swing. More than 20 Federation MX mecha were entangled with an entire mecha clan of the Empire like scattered bubbles, sharing life and death with each other, loving each other, unable to be separated. Iron 7th Division's firepower formation that hadn't been activated all this time couldn't carry out any long-range attacks at all. In the high-speed mecha battle that looked like streams of light, any coverage from the firepower would hurt their own MX mechas. In reality, Iron 7th Division didn't have the intention to carry out any long-range attacks at all. Countless mechanical troops passed by the burnt fortifications, passed the corpses of their comrades, and silently walked into the distance. Nearly 10,000 Federation soldiers and the most advanced tanks used the shortest amount of time to seal off the valley around the battlefield. The majestic Iron 7th Division didn't care about the intense mecha battle at the center of the valley at all. They began to change their formation. Accompanied by the low and frightening rumbling sounds of engines, one regiment even left the battlefield and entered the edge of the wild forest outside the valley in the northwest direction. 4 regiments silently took up their respective positions and aimed all of their firepower control equipment at the Imperial assault group that was about to arrive. 4 mecha divisions drove away from their positions at high speed and followed the military path at the bottom of the valley to seal off the 4 exits of the valley battlefield. They began to quickly and nervously set up a pomegranate cannon formation. Looking at the deployment of these troops, it seemed like they wanted to seal off all of the exits of this mountainous battlefield. The Mecha Division soldiers in the northwest direction who were responsible for using their own lives in cannon fire to seal off the exits didn't even have time to complete their orders before they saw 7 heavily damaged Empire Moon Wolf 3rd generation mechas turn into streams of light and fly past their positions. Battalion Commander. All of the Federation soldiers thought that they had made an unforgivable mistake, but they immediately relaxed. This was because a Black Federation MX mecha was chasing closely behind the 7 damaged Empire mecha, whistling through the air as it chased after them. Forcefully seal off all signals for 3 minutes. Don't worry about your own command system. I want the Empire people to not make a single sound in these 3 minutes. I don't need any command right now. The troops at all levels will do as they see fit. Fight however you want. On a lonely mountain peak, the lonely Du Shaoqing stood in front of the electronic map. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, he bowed slightly and said indifferently, "I only want you to destroy all of these Empire mechas within 3 minutes." Yes, Commander. The MX mecha had completely suppressed the Empire mecha group at this time. Iron 7 Division's electronic troops had already begun their overflow attacks. Although the Empire's communications were completely blocked, Iron 7 Division's own battlefield commands were also completely ineffective. The officers couldn't understand this kind of military order, but they definitely accepted it. This was because they firmly believed that any order from Commander Shaoqing had its own deeper meaning. When the Ministry of Defense drafted the plan for tonight, the Federation only had 230 MXs. Our Iron 7 Division, a division, took 1/10 of that. This is the absolute trust the President and the Ministry of Defense have in my division. Du Shaoqing slowly straightened his body. Looking at the Black Federation MX mecha on the screen, he said, "I never doubted that we would win this battle, but this victory is not enough." After saying this most outstanding young man of the Federation took off the sunglasses on his nose and rubbed the space between his eyebrows, looking slightly tired. Luring the Empire mecha group deep in, using horizontal fire and anti-mecha minefields to force the Empire mecha group to scatter, then sending the MX mecha out, 1 against 3, everything that happened on the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge battlefield was all within his calculations. If he had used the MX mecha group attack from the start, or if he had thrown in all of Iron 7 Division's forces, the Imperial Moonwolf group would have been utterly defeated, but there was always the possibility that a few mecha would have escaped. And he, Du Shaoqing, didn't want any of these Empire mecha to survive and spread a single word. "I have the MX, the stubborn enemy is helpless." However, not only did he want to take down this mecha brigade, he also wanted to give the Imperial assault group behind them a surprise. Outnumbered, and in this dangerous moment on the battlefield, he still had such ambition, such determination, and such fighting spirit. Other than the Iron 7 Division, other than this cold-faced Commander Xiao Qing, who else could it be? Chapter 420. At this moment, in the lonely mountains of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, more than 20 black mechas with a hint of elegance, but they were still heavy enough to crush the rock surface. They were jumping up and down, flames spurting out of their arms as they dodged and dodged at high speed, defeating the black and cyan mechas of the Empire one after another. A few months ago, the Shell Motor Company and the Ministry of National Defense had jointly produced more than 200 MX mecha. Naturally, there were more now, but they still needed to go through a series of pre-battle tests and adjustments. Right now, there were less than 100 mecha that could actually be used in battle. On Planet 5460, the Federation had invested 50 of them, and the Iron 7th Division had taken half of them. The standard MX mecha had only been officially set last year, and in just one short year, it had already been officially distributed to the frontline troops. This was the federal military's biggest secret and source of confidence. The Ministry of National Defense dared to set up such a situation for the Imperial Expeditionary Force on this border planet. Even though the early stages of the battle had been so tragic, the frontline command had still forcefully endured it, ignoring the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge for the sake of the bigger picture. It was also because of this. The Empire's mecha group had already been led into the center of the battlefield by the brave soldiers of the Iron 7th Division's 3rd Regiment. Faced with the sudden appearance of more than 20 high-performance MX mecha, the Empire's mecha group was on the verge of collapse. The secret of the MX mecha had been hidden until now, and finally achieved perfect results. However, Du Xiaoqing still wanted to hide this secret for a while longer, all the way until the Imperial Expeditionary Force's assault brigade arrived. Any secret was like old wine. The longer it was hidden, the stronger the aroma of the wine, the more intoxicating it was, and the more it could kill. This intoxicating old wine could probably only make the Empire's people drunk tonight. Since that was the case, Du Xiaoqing naturally wanted to drink to his heart's content. Du Xiaoqing looked at the battle situation displayed on the screen. He looked at the 3rd-generation mecha of the Empire that were retreating bit by bit, and looked at the troops that had already firmly held all the checkpoints. He confirmed that victory was already decided, but the solemn expression on his face did not disappear at all. He used his index finger and thumb to rub the space between his eyebrows until it was bright red. He lowered his head and said, "Use the reserve team to replace the 3rd group." After being startled for a moment, Shiman Jin quickly nodded, and used the fastest speed to pass down the order of the teacher. From the very beginning, this sniping battle in the mountainous region had become a proper battle for the Imperial Mech Squad. There was nothing strange about it, and there was no element of surprise. Iron 7th Division couldn't possibly surround the high-speed mecha swarm, but they also had to annihilate the enemy in this Yellow Mountain range. They had no choice but to resort to such a desperate strategy. The 3rd Regiment was the first unit to fire the first shot. In order to complete the tactical maneuvers of the entire division, this heroic unit had sacrificed too much blood and sacrificed too much. Relying on the strength and firepower of an entire regiment, they were able to hold off the Imperial Mech Squad for 10 minutes. It was truly a tough battle. Even Du Xiaoqing, who only cared about winning and losing and didn't care about life and death, looked at the tragic state of his subordinates on the screen. Although his expression didn't change, his heart was already slightly tense. If an Iron Division didn't experience the baptism of blood and fire on the battlefield, how could it become a truly invincible division? Finally, they left the drill site of the capital ring and came to the bloody front line. The 3rd Regiment held on, while the other regiments watched with their eyes wide open. After being educated, Iron 7th Division went through the first test and knew what the battlefield was like. This was the inevitable process for a highly trained unit to become a truly invincible army. Du Shaoqing understood this, but he was not as calm as he appeared on the surface as he looked coldly at the battle losses. This was because this was also his first time on the battlefield. This was the first time he saw his subordinates fall and die one after another like rice flowers blown by the wind. He muttered to himself, Du Shaoqing, you also received a shocking education. This is good, isn't it? On the battlefield of the hills and valleys that were close to 20 square kilometers, the situation of the Imperial Moonwolf group was very bad. It was very miserable. In just a short minute, more than 20 Moonwolf third-generation mechas were completely destroyed by the high-speed attacks of the Federation's black mechas. The scene of the black-green mechas burning and falling in the mountains around them, and the bright light of the explosions made the Imperial pilots shocked to confirm that these 20 new Black Federation mechas completely suppressed the third-generation and even fourth-generation mechas of the Empire in all aspects. It was clearly a situation where they had the advantage in numbers, but because of the terrifying performance of the Federation's black mechas, there was an absolute change in the situation. Many times, it even felt like one Black Federation MX was besieging 3 or even 4 Empire mechas. This was not a battle of equal strength at all. The captain of the 2nd Squadron of the Empire, who temporarily took over the position of commander, looked on in despair as the black-green mechas were buried in the mountains and valleys one after another, falling apart, but he could not find a way to deal with it. What made his heart even colder was that from the moment the 20 new Federation mechas appeared, extremely powerful electronic interference and noise echoes covered the entire mountainous battlefield. With such strength and wide range of electronic suppression, the Federal Army's own command system would definitely be completely paralyzed. The Federation people were betting such a huge price to not let their mechas send out a message. What was the reason? No matter how advanced the weapons were, no matter how desperate the situation of the battlefield was, it would not cause the unusually strong and cold soldiers of the Empire to have any thoughts of fear. But at this moment, thinking about the assault brigade that was rushing over from the back, this squadron captain suddenly woke up and shouted loudly in the communication system, "Retreat! Plum Blossom Formation, disperse! Leave the battlefield!" However, the encirclement was already set. How could Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division let these Empire mechas escape and send out an emergency warning to the brigade behind them? Under the gentle slope of the mountain valley to the southwest, a Moonwolf third-generation mecha that had its right arm almost completely damaged crazily spat out flames as it charged down the slope with no regard for its life. This mecha was the closest to the entrance of the valley. Although it could clearly see that the Federal forces had already set up a dense artillery formation at the entrance of the valley 1 kilometer away, it still tried to charge over. No matter whether it lived or died after charging over, it had to leave the Federation's electronic coverage area and tell the brigade that was rushing over that the Federation people now had an extremely terrifying new mecha. They had to be careful. Whoosh! 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 3 laser-guided rockets drilled out from between the dark mountain rocks and shot towards the black-green mecha. The mecha, whose balance system was severely damaged, could no longer maintain the high speed and mobility it had at the start of the battle. With great difficulty, it dodged twice, narrowly avoiding 2 of the rockets. However, the last laser-guided rocket struck the outer edge of the mecha's mechanical leg viciously. There was a flash of fire and an explosion. The Empire mecha crashed heavily to the ground. A moment later, the mecha forced itself to stand up again. Accompanied by the sound of friction between its alloy structure, it slowly but incomparably madly walked towards the entrance of the valley once more. The word walk could only be used because this mecha's speed was already indescribably slow. However, at this moment, 3 more rockets shot out from between the shadowy mountains. Like red dots, they bombarded the body of the gigantic mecha with unparalleled precision. The Empire mecha fell into the flames once more. When it stood up again, the body of the mecha had long been damaged. The charred gaps in the armor looked somewhat sinister. Countless metal components and wires hung pathetically around the mecha. It looked extremely scattered, as if it would fall apart into a pile of dust if it took one more step forward. In reality, this mecha that was closest to the entrance of the valley couldn't even take that step forward. Iron 7 Division's medium-range precision firepower covered its entire body. It was continuously hit, smashed, and then collapsed, unable to get up again. The remaining power of the engine made the body on the ground twitch incessantly, like a dying insect. After a short 2.5 minutes, Iron 7 Division's focus shifted to the next battle. The officers' expressions were serious as they deployed the firepower positions. More than 10,000 Federation soldiers were scattered out of the mountains and even into the distant plains, preparing to welcome the Imperial assault group that was about to arrive. Du Shaoqing took a scalding hot towel from an orderly's hand and wiped his face vigorously. The hot steam couldn't melt his cold expression in the slightest. When he subconsciously looked at the close-up battlefield feeds sent back by the monitoring equipment on the mountaintop, a complicated expression appeared on his face. In the center of the feed was a black MX mecha of the Federation. This mecha alone had attracted the attention of as many as 10 Empire mechas. Although this black MX didn't look any different from the MX equipped by Iron 7 Division, he still recognized the identity of the other mecha in the shortest amount of time. This was because this black MX didn't use any long-range fire control system. It only relied on the high RPM alloy knife to slaughter the 10 Empire mechas and force them to retreat again and again. That mech was like a bolt of black lightning, moving up and down like a bolt of lightning. Under the concentrated firepower of the third-generation mechs of the Empire, it actually managed to avoid most of the damage, advancing and retreating like a ghost. Every time the high-revving alloy blade extended out of its mechanical arm, sparks would fly out of the Empire's mech as it miserably retreated. If these 10 Empire mechas hadn't risked their lives to support each other, the Black MX would have destroyed most of them. Du Shaoqing had only seen 2 people in his life who could operate such a terrifying mecha. He narrowed his eyes at the screen and frowned slightly. He thought back to that time in the training base, when he and Su Lo had a tit-for-tat discussion in the twilight. Now it seemed that if his Iron 7 Division had 20 Sulis, no, even if he only had 10 Sulis, 10 Black MXs, combined with conventional firepower, wouldn't it be easy to wipe out an Imperial mech squad? Perhaps the soldiers of the 3rd Regiment wouldn't have to pay such a terrible price. A moment later, he finally figured it out and reaffirmed his military philosophy. He thought to himself in a self-deprecating manner, there are only a few people in the universe like Su Lo. Be it the Federation or the Empire, where can we steal 10 of them? For some reason, Su Lo, who had rushed back from afar to participate in this spectacular mecha battle, didn't know that the cold and callous teacher Shaoqing at the peak of the mountain had coincidentally decided to cherish his talent. At this moment, he was moving his hands at high speed in the cockpit with a pale face. Every pair of muscle fibers in his body were squeezing and rubbing against each other, transferring all the force to the MX. This made the mecha below him move faster, faster and faster. In the dense group of mecha, he moved at high speed like a ghost. Jian Shui's face was also pale, but her eyes were abnormally bright as she stared at the screen. Her hands were clenched tightly, and her voice trembled as she said, right, 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 right again. Right again. Su Lo was silent. He thought to himself, this isn't a video game, so why hasn't this national girl fainted from fright? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.